general wealth that we're used to, I don't see that recovering. I don't see that we're likely to bounce through this minor blip, as people talk about it, or significant recession back into, unless we change, into a happy and prosperous future economically. I think food is going to start becoming short, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be restricted just to poorer nations. We find it hard to meet the food needs of the expanded world population already. And when one gets major impacts, let's suppose we had really major droughts or floods affecting European and world wheat crops, a large number of people would be deprived of staple foods. And if you start doing that even in a Western nation when people are already feeling financially squeezed, then that's a recipe for big problems. So I see increasing starvation, I see increasing poverty, and I see increasing conflict arising from these things. And actually, those are all health issues. Health around the world has always been driven by poverty and starvation and conflict, not just by malaria and diarrheal disease and so forth. We concentrate on CO2, of course, but there are a whole raft of greenhouse gases, some of which are released in vastly smaller concentrations of CO2, but that have very, very much greater warming effects. So some of them are measured in thousands of times the warming potential of CO2. Methane is probably around 23 times as powerful a greenhouse gas as is CO2, and you say its half-life is short. The problem, of course, with methane is that it's also part of a positive feedback loop. So methane hydrates are frozen into Arctic tundras, and as we warm and we thaw that frozen soil, those methane hydrates are released. Now they contain well over twice the total carbon content in the entire world's atmosphere. And that sort of pulse, even if those gases could have a short half-life, that sort of very rapid pulse of something with 23 times the greenhouse gas warming potential of CO2 is a positive feedback which we can't build into our modelling with ease. That's the problem with these things. Our models often don't build in these unexpected positive feedbacks. So methane, yes, rapid reduction by things like changes in land use and changes in how we use things like cattle, very important indeed, but we've also got to keep our eye on the ball that it's also part of a positive feedback loop that's very, very dangerous, and we can't control that without slowing down warming from other sources. So I'm at the, I suppose, the high-tech end of medicine, which is relatively meaningless in terms of public health, I appreciate, and I struggle with that sometimes because, trying to save some lives is not perhaps the same as saving others. I suppose the reason I remain with it to a degree is that I'm not a good politician. I'm not good at political process, which is why I don't think I can stand there and throw stones at politicians and tell them they should do better, because I don't know how that works. And neither, oddly enough, do I want to stand there and throw stones at fossil fuel industry particularly. They are where they are, and they have a responsibility to shareholders to make money. We need to help them make their money in a different way. And we need to do that aggressively and urgently. If we just harangue them without offering them that other market, we can't expect them to change. It's unreasonable to expect them to change. But we do need to urgently assist them in making that change.
Everybody knows about forests and the importance of deforestation for climate change. So everybody is talking about it at this climate summit and implementing policies to reduce the emissions from deforestation. But few people know about the emissions from peatlands. Peats, the material in swampy areas where the plant material falls in the water in oxygen-low acid water and remains there for hundreds and thousands of years. This peat is now having huge stocks of carbon. Globally, there is more carbon stored in peat than twice the amount that is stored in the forest of the whole world, 70% of the global atmosphere. So if this is released, we have a real big problem. Well, the bad news is this peat is now rapidly decomposing, burning, mines, and is just converted into carbon dioxide. So we are facing a disaster. Globally, 3,000 megatons of peat carbon are released every year. 3,000 megatons of carbon dioxide every year again. That is 11% of the total amount of all global fossil fuel emissions. That is enormous. This amount is increasing rapidly because in many areas of the world the swamp areas are drained to enable logging for the timber, to enable agriculture, to enable, for instance, in Southeast Asia, pulp plantations and palm oil plantations, crops that can't stand water. So they drain the area to enable the agriculture, and by draining it, the acid, oxygen low water disappears, and the peat that was stored like pickled onions is just exposed to the air and will react. Carbon in the peat will react with the oxygen in the air to carbon dioxide. And this is taking place very rapidly, especially in the tropics. Especially Southeast Asia is notorious for this. Only from Indonesia, 2/3 of all those emissions are released every year, 2,000 megatons. Because Indonesia is cutting down its swamp forests, its rainforests and peatlands. They drain the area to enable equipment to enter the area, to lock the trees, to take out the Meranti and Ramin trees for our furniture. After that, often the same companies continue the drainage and they drain the area till 1 meter deep to establish plantations for palm oil, for instance. Palm oil used as a biofuel in many Western countries and subsidized as a green, environmentally friendly biofuel is produced in those areas. Under those plantations, with a drainage of a depth of 1 meter, we see that every year 10 centimeters is just evaporating, disappearing in the form of carbon dioxide. If you look at the 1 hectare, this is an emission of 100 tons of carbon dioxide from every hectare every year after year, till all the peat is disappeared. This is of course a disaster. This 100 tons of carbon dioxide are just released to enable a palm oil plantation that just produces 6 tons of palm oil a year. 6 tons of palm oil a year, but the production costs 100 tons of carbon dioxide. This is not a green fuel. It is worse than mineral oil. It is worse than coal. It's worse than anything. So countries should stop supporting those biofuels. Countries in the Western world should support countries like Indonesia to maintain and manage their peatland areas very well, because those carbon stocks are too precious and to prevent a disaster. And countries really should give money to the communities in poor regions in the peatlands to manage their areas in a way so they can keep the carbon in the soil. That is a global problem, and you can't expect a poor local community to solve this problem.
Morning, my name is Nyoman Suryadi Putra. I'm the Technical Director of Ellens International Indonesia. So currently we have a project, one, something related with the rehabilitations of the mangrove habitats in Aceh. So Aceh, one of the countries in the Asian countries, have been affected severely during the tsunami. So in Aceh we are working together with WWF Indonesia, and this project funded by Oxfam Novib, Netherlands. Yeah. So we started the project in year 2005 in August, and it will be last in December 2008. So far up to now we've planted already almost 2 million mangrove seedlings, also including the beech tree species, which is Casuarina. So from 2 years working in Aceh coastal areas, up to now we were able to sequester almost 12,000 tons of carbon dioxide. So hopefully in the coming years more carbons will be sequestered because the plant keep growing up. So that is about Aceh. In Aceh we are working with the local community which were affected by the tsunami. Yeah? So we provide them with the small grants, yeah? So they can start it with our small grant to start their livelihood, but at the same time we were asking them to plant mangrove seedlings and also the beech tree species. Yeah? So the project will last until next year. So the second thing I would like to raise here, it is about the peatland. Peatland, Indonesia has the largest tropical peatland all over the world. Yeah? We have almost 21 million hectares of peatland. And our peatland stored so much carbon, even though the above ground of the vegetation is already degraded. So the below ground carbon that we calculated already, it was about 125 gigatons of equivalent carbon dioxide. So we urge very much that the people attending these conventions to really take care about peatlands, of the tropical peatlands, because so much carbon being stored. Yeah, so we have problems annually because of this kind of peat fires, because of the drainage, yeah, because of the illegal loggers activities, and then we have problems with the peat fire. And then according to the recent findings, our peatland emitted so much carbon, mainly from the burning, about 1.4 gigatons of carbon dioxide emitted annually because of the fire. And then currently, in Central Kalimantan, we have a project called Central Kalimantan Peatland Project, and the project carried out together with the consortium consisting of the University of Palangkaraya, WWF, CARE International, and also with the local government. Yeah, and then from that project, we tried to rehabilitate the peatlands by blocking the canals. By blocking the canals, actually we tried to rise up the groundwater table. By rising the groundwater table, we tried to keep the peatland wet. So by keeping the peatlands wet, that means the peatlands will be very difficult to get fire. So by doing this, we do hope that we can save a lot of carbons during the dry seasons.
Quite correctly, I think about the impact of ideas on actions and on our culture and society as a whole. I want to look for a few minutes at where we get our ideas and how we might change them. What underlies the fact that we are having a conference on ecology where the major nation of the West, along with its allies in large part, are the people whose minds we cannot change. How is it that it is so impossible to make the United States, for instance, understand the crisis we're in and their relationship to the rest of it? I want to look then at Western ideas, religious ideas, and how those religious ideas are affecting both our economic principles and our scientific choices. Jonathan Edwards wrote once, "Saints do not see things others do not see." On the contrary, saints see just exactly what everyone else sees, but they see it differently. What does the West see? And how do they see it? That brings them into meetings like this and puts them in tension with what seems to be so commonly conscious to so much of the world. As Richard said, we know the situation. We know that we are in a period where what we see is a vast and complicated and crucial and obviously skewed world around us. We're losing, talk about asking animals and trees for forgiveness because we need to cut down a tree to build a house. We are destroying an average of 200 million animals a year for research on cosmetics. 2/3 of the hungry of this world, for whatever reasons, because the earth isn't producing or there are no trees there, 2/3 of the hungry of this world are women. 2/3 of the illiterate of this world are women. And 2/3 of the poor of the world are women. That can't be an accident. That has to be somebody's policy or philosophy of life. That this is a part of the world that you can feed last, house last, educate last, and free last. Where do we get ideas like that? How could we possibly live in this society and say there's something reasonable about that? We can rupture the placenta of the earth and sit back and not worry about it. We can watch the polar ice cap going and change the channel because it has nothing to do with us, and we can send our delegates to meetings like this, and we will go on choosing long-term profits over, or short-term profits over long-term treaties. We're using chemicals to activate the soil, and they're now depleting that land as well as poisoning the water that we need to grow those things. We talk about defending our security, and we're using and creating nuclear weaponry designed to destroy a greater part of the earth, and we have the effrontery, the arrogance to call that defense. How do you do that? And then trumpet treaties that have left the annihilation industry completely intact. What we have managed to eliminate is 1% of the nuclear arsenal of this world. And yet we don't see trouble. If those are the ideas that we are throwing into the universe, no wonder we have had 16 conferences on climate change. Not because we don't have the scientific data, but because the ideas that we are formed in the West have got to be changed. Now, I'm going to argue that these ideas are intellectual ideas. They are not simply spiritual ideas. They have spiritual impact, but they don't come out of our best spiritual understandings of the spiritual nature of the cosmos. And yet, we are in a world where, in my country, in a world filled with the obscenely poor, we are also filled with churchgoers. Now, there's got to be a disconnect between what we say is the spiritual life and what we assume is also the civic life into which or out of which we build our spiritual concepts. We haven't reached the point, clearly, of seeing differently. I'm not sure that we are really at the point, however many conferences we've had, as a people, of seeing at all. There was an essay written in 1960 by Lynn White Jr. The name of the essay is the Historical Roots of the Ecological Crisis. That essay was perceived as a kind of theological heresy. It is now taken, it's a classic in the development of theological thought. What did Lynn White say that shook the religious world? White wrote, "The major problem facing the modern world is that the Judeo-Christian ethic justifies domination." The major problem facing the modern world is that the Judeo-Christian ethic justifies domination. In other words, White was saying that what people do or fail to do about ecological issues depends on what they have been taught to think about creation, about themselves, and about their relationships to the things around them as a result of their thinking about the nature of God. So, for instance, if water has no meaning except for my comfort as a human being, then I can dam it up and drain it off. I can drown it in oil and waste and tin cans until it chokes the fish and poisons the children without even having so much as the grace to blush. And that is precisely what we do. We have not just separated ourselves from nature. That would be some sort of civic fault line. We have distinguished ourselves from nature, but more than that, we have made nature our product to manipulate. We have taken the ownership of nature. We don't see it. Now, the question is why, and I believe that the religious foundation for this problem in the Western world, as you move from one of these meetings to another, lies in the fact that the Western world in the Judeo-Christian tradition has chosen to choose one creation story over another. Like most religions, there's more than one creation story in Western theology. The one most of you would know, I bet, if you raised your hands, is the one you learned in Sunday school someplace about Adam and Eve. They're put in the garden, and the ancient tradition translation says, to fill the earth and subdue it. Why are we here? What's our purpose? To fill the earth and subdue it, to take it and keep it, to keep it and steward it, to have it and use it. As a result, with that attitude that we are here to subdue the earth, we begin by losing our balance. We have forfeited our spiritual perspective. You can't sit around in a room and talk about spiritual perspective on the one hand when you are feeding it with some sort of theological barriers or obstacles to the spiritual life and the sustenance of the earth itself. We have put ourselves, in other words, this most religious people, in spiritual peril. When you realize that, you realize then that the Judeo-Christian ethic is, as a matter of fact, the most anthropocentric, the most human-centered of all religions. It begins by centering on the creation of humanity. They didn't talk about the flowers, and the first day this, the second day that, the third day this, the fourth day that, and then you. Now we got to what counts. Now we got to what's going to do it right. Here sits the crown of creation. I am looking at it. Then it proceeds by glorifying it, and it ends with concern solely with the redemption of humanity. There is never any talk about what will happen to the earth, except that it will burn up, blow away, but you and I will stay. Those ideas are very clear. We teach that creation is a series of stages, and that each one is higher than the one before it. When you teach that, if you allow that idea to seep into its most logical viewpoint, you're saying then that humanity outranks the universe in splendor and achievement. Whatever you do is enough. This is God's answer. Secondly, we say, man, the male, is the crown of creation. We have built a pyramid, and up here sits the male. Now we know that's true because men have told us so. There isn't any doubt about how this system goes together. We've got somebody at the top of it whose rationality has brought us to this point. Whose rationality has brought us to this point. So if a woman weeps over it, if a woman cries about it, if a woman aches about it, we say women are like that, they're unreasonable. 3, we say God planned the world for human benefit. It's just this big cornucopia of Thanksgiving gifts, and you can have as many as you want. It's all there for us. Its purpose, the whole purpose of the planet itself, is to sustain our creature comforts, and it's eternal. It will always keep producing for us. That's what its purpose is. What are we worrying about? This is a blip. This is a blip on the cosmological screen. This is just a little temperature change. This is for us. Nothing bad is going to happen to it. Number 4, we teach we own nature. It belongs to us. And so finally, number 5, we say the function of this earth is to serve man's purpose, whatever that scope, whatever the end of it. That means then that we can now assume with confidence that humans are above nature. We're not nature. We're beyond nature. Despite the fact that as the top of the food chain, we'll be the first to go if pollution continues at the rate you can measure it tonight. Well, it's a neat picture. It's a tidy picture, but it's very partial in a world in which 30% of us consume 80% of the world's resources and somehow or other diminish the rest of the human race. That was the first creation story. There's a second one. Now the interesting part of ecclesiastical gossip here is that the second one was really the first one. Somebody along the line put this second one first. I have a funny feeling it was for their economic advantage then, too. What's the second creation story? You remember this one, too. This is where Scripture says, the Judeo-Christian Scripture says, God brought the animals to Adam for naming. Remember that one at all? That was hardly touched. It's hardly ever preached from a pulpit in the West. It's almost never exegeted. But when they do exegete it, they say, now what this means is that by giving the human being the right to name the animals, that's the sign that the human being got power over the animals. I love asking a lay audience, how many in here have children? Anybody in here have children? Did you name any of them? Did you get any power? No, you bet you didn't. You get a little less power every single day. I don't care what you named them. The whole notion that it's a sound theological exegesis to say that this was simply another way of proving that the human being has power over every other living creature has got to be at least a certain degree of nonsense. So we have then a story in which the animals are brought to Adam, I would argue, to indicate the relationship between the human being and nature. The honest to God, caring, loving, responsible relationship. You don't name animals that you take into your family. The animal that you take into your family becomes part of your family. You take responsibility for that animal. You develop personal relationship. You would indeed say to that animal, if you had to kill it, thank you for what you've done. It breaks my heart to take this. But I know that this is the connection between us and that you would give your life for me. You have two creation stories. The first is the story that explicates a theology of domination. It's all yours. Do anything you want to with it. Argue at every COP conference. Tell all of the smaller nations that this is your decision. You bought the mine. You own the diamonds. You get the oil. They're all yours. The second creation story gives you the theology of relationship, of responsibility, of ownership and care and love and sustenance and for an eternal understanding. It's beginning then to move your churches, to move your scriptures, to move your own minds, to teach your own children, to see that this theology of domination is what really is the spiritual demon in resistance in this conference. And until churches begin to emphasize not simply recycling, but God's purpose in putting us into relationship with nature, we're not going to change any minds. That legislation won't hold up. You'll be having COP conferences until your great-great-grandchildren are coming. COP 1762, and nothing has happened yet. Somehow or other, if we're going to be spiritual people, if we have any respect whatsoever for the way God works with humankind and the word that God has given all of us in our scriptures, then it's time to look up the second story. It's time to see what it says about eating organically, about what it says about not destroying the earth, about eating what you have in front of you. It is not a theology of domination. We have to choose between these two, and we have to know that the one is reckless and the second one is relational. Saints do not see what other people do not see. Saints see just what everybody else sees, but they see it differently. It's time for us to open up our scriptures, open up our churches, open up our spiritual counseling groups, and begin to see who we are a little different. Because if we don't get this story, we're going to be the first ones to go. That your presence here is a sign of grace. It's a sign of holiness. It's a sign of goodness breaking through. It's a sign of this call of God in the human heart. Find your second creation story and yourself in it, and the world will be saved. You're not going to do this with science. You're not going to do it with math. You're not going to do it with oil. You're not going to do it with money. You can only throw the thought out into the universe that we are to be in a love affair. Think about the nature of God, the nature of creation, the nature of our relationships, the nature of the cosmos. Theology is a thought process. Spirituality is the way we choose to live because of what we believe. Now you see a lot of threat in the major religious traditions because they don't like people using the word spirituality. Spirituality says, I don't know if you're thinking what you ought to think. So until somehow or other the theological basis for what we do, somehow or other we talk about sustainability of the earth, we have to sustain a spirituality that is an earth-centered spirituality because that is our obligation to the creation. Theology is not something you can just throw away. It's a dangerous subject, a wonderfully dangerous subject, because it changes hearts and minds. But you've got to look at the one you were given and decide if your theology and your thoughts about science are relative. Do they match?
In one of the discussions or workshop I attended, somebody made the remark that if climate was a bank, it would have been rescued a long time ago. And I think that it's a very crude remark, but it really sums up what is valued in the society. That we, the West, everybody preaches about that we're on this catastrophic path, but no one is willing to sacrifice anything. But we're willing to come up with money out of thin air to save banks, 600 billion and plus others. So I think it really speaks to how do we get that shift in awareness? How do we get the masses of people to really come to grip with this about our miscalculation or misvaluation of what is important, what is essential to life, and what it is that we need to actually save and give up to save what we value, or we say we value.
Yes, I really mean it. You know, I honestly mean it. That I believe religion legitimates when you accept as your creation story a story about domination, and you define it. You define domination as your spiritual purpose and reason for existence. Nobody's going to use that word in so many terms, but when you say fill the earth and subdue it, that's what you're talking about. I want to know, I think you need to go to the UN designers and definers of COP16 and ask them, why is this the only conference in my memory on this subject that introduced even the notion of the relationship between spiritual ideas, scientific ideas, cosmic ideas, and economic ideas. I think you ought to be having conferences for pastors, writers, preachers, and teachers, and ask them how they are dealing with this topic. Churches are staying away from this topic like it's a plague. They'll tell you, well, that's not our question. That's a political problem, or it's a scientific problem. No, it's not. Every one of these speakers tonight have told you it's a spiritual problem. And I'm not sure this is coming through the churches at all. I think that we have to call the churches to their own responsibility to deal with this topic as a spiritual question. And then when, and I don't mean to imply that you do it first and you hold everything else, but until we see the two, all we're doing, all this conference is doing, is maintaining the notion that the two things are separate. And they're not. Until the spiritual religious community as a community comes on board across all traditions and says, this is what our scriptures are about, and this is what we say, you are not going to know why you can't get people to agree on these issues.
Hi there. I'm really happy to be here today to tell you about one of the impacts climate change is having in the ocean that really hasn't had as much focus as I wish it and I hope it will have in the future. So climate change has 3 impacts in the ocean. It causes the oceans to warm, it causes them to become more acidic, so decrease in pH, and it also causes them to lose oxygen. And so today I'll be focusing on the loss of oxygen from the oceans. And we know that scientifically as ocean deoxygenation. And so the ocean actually takes up more than 90% of the heat that's produced from anthropogenic CO2 emissions. And when the ocean warms, it has some really important consequences, like deoxygenation. And unfortunately, this is a fairly new problem. Even scientists have only started addressing it in the last 20 years. And so it hasn't received quite as much attention. But oxygen is fundamental for most life. We breathe oxygen, fish breathe oxygen through their gills. Pretty much all of the organisms you see in that coral reef require oxygen to live, and so oxygen is very fundamental. However, climate change actually causes oxygen levels in the ocean to decrease, and that's mostly due to warming. And we've actually seen that in the data. Globally, we have seen that the oceans are losing oxygen, and we've already seen biological consequences of this oxygen loss, because again, oxygen is very important to support life. And the groups that are most sensitive to loss of oxygen are actually fish and crustaceans. So crustaceans being our crabs and our lobsters. So these are the groups that are really important for our fisheries. And so that's why a lot of countries should actually be interested in what's going on with oxygen loss on their coastlines and in the open ocean. And so let's just take a moment and take a breath and think about what's in the air that we just inhaled. So about 21% of the air that you just inhaled is oxygen. And as Carol Turley will tell you, there are 2 lungs on this planet. One of the lungs is the terrestrial lung, and it's producing about half of the oxygen, and the other lung is our ocean lung. That's all of the algae that grow in the oceans, and that's producing 50% of the oxygen we breathe. So a lot of the oxygen that we're getting is actually coming from all of these small phytoplankton in the ocean. In the ocean, there is oxygen, but it's there in a dissolved form, and it's much harder to get out of the water for marine organisms that live in there. And oxygen content in the ocean is dependent on the temperature, the amount of mixing that's occurring at the surface, and then the biology. So biology produces oxygen through photosynthesis, and it uses up oxygen through respiration. So we respire, and all of the organisms in the ocean also respire, thereby using oxygen. And climate change has a negative impact on all 3 of these. And so we'll just do a little intuition building so we can all become comfortable with why climate change would negatively impact oxygen levels in the ocean. So first of all, warm water holds less oxygen. We can do many experiments in the lab. It's a very simple physical property, and we see that when temperature increases, the amount of gas that water can hold decreases. And so because of that, just simply when you warm the water, it's going to be able to hold less oxygen. And we can actually see this in the lab, but then we can actually see this in the data from the ocean, where the tropics in light purple are areas with low oxygen, and the tropics are the areas with the lowest oxygen at the surface, because warm water can simply hold less oxygen, whereas polar regions have higher oxygen content, just because of the property that cold water can hold more oxygen. And then warm water is harder to mix, so when you get warming at the surface from climate change, it becomes more difficult to mix that water. When you can mix more water, you can get more oxygen into the water from the atmosphere. When you can mix less water due to that warming, you get a stratified water column. That means that everything outside of that mixed layer is no longer in contact with the atmosphere. And a lot of biological respiration is going on at those mid-depth levels. So if you can't mix the oxygen in there, it's going to get depleted much more rapidly. Another reason why warming leads to more oxygen use is because when it's warmer, you actually breathe more, you respire more, you use more oxygen. And so that's what's going on in the ocean with all of the organisms that live there. The ocean is full of bacteria, so there are about 1 million bacteria in every milliliter of seawater, and all of those bacteria are utilizing oxygen. So that, And when the temperatures increase, you also get increased respiration. And so a lot of times you get increased respiration in areas where there's high productivity. So whenever you have a big algae bloom, for example, and once the algae bloom sinks out of the water column, it gets decomposed by all of those bacteria, and that leads to a reduction in oxygen. So whenever you get increased nutrients, whether that's through sewage runoff or fertilizer runoff, or whenever you get increased nutrients due to upwelling, so coastal circulation, nutrient-rich water coming up, you're going to be in a situation where you have high surface productivity and then more decomposition at depth. And so coastally we have a lot of hypoxic areas. So hypoxia is simply defined as an oxygen concentration that's detrimental to life. So in most areas, most organisms can't live in a hypoxic zone. Some are specifically adapted for it, but most animals can't live in those areas. And so in red you can see all of the coastal hypoxic zones. There are more than 400 identified now, and so these usually correspond to areas with dense populations. And so these are primarily driven by a lot of nutrient runoff from our farms, from sewage, and so most parts of the world with dense population have these coastal hypoxic zones. And so if you actually go on Google Earth and you go into Google Ocean, you can take a look to see all of the hypoxic areas that have been identified in your own area. So that's us at the National Stadium, and you can see the Baltic Sea actually has quite a few hypoxic zones. There are also open ocean low oxygen zones. We call these oxygen minimum zones. And they're naturally occurring there because we have really nutrient-rich water at the surface, and once we have high productivity at the surface and it sinks down and gets decomposed, it utilizes a lot of the oxygen. And so we have these large oxygen minimum zones, particularly in the Pacific. And so in this map, everything that's not gray is a part of the ocean that has hypoxic waters. And so we see really large areas of that in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, and then we also have hypoxic areas off of the west coast of Africa. And so where these hypoxic zones actually butt up against the continental margins, that really impacts our fisheries, because a lot of our fisheries target the continental margins. And these are large areas where most fish that we like to fish can't live. And so the total hypoxic area on the continental margins, so a lot of the places we like to fish, it's greater than the area of Poland and France combined. So you're really talking about large areas where most fish that we like to fish can't live. And so not only are they large in area, they're about 8% of the total ocean area, but they're also very deep. So you can have parts of the ocean where you can have 1,000 meters of water that's hypoxic, which can't support most normal aerobic life. And so one of the main points is that this is a very widespread problem, and probably whether you have a coastal hypoxic zone due to runoff or you have an oceanic zone due to your or an oceanic low oxygen zone due to your location, most coastlines actually have a low oxygen problem. And this low oxygen problem gets exacerbated when you experience surface warming because of the properties of how warming affects oxygen content in water. And so we've actually seen in our data that there has been a decrease in oxygen, and the new assessment, IPCC Assessment 5 report, actually predicted that by the end of the 21st century you'll see a 3 to 6% decline in global oxygen levels in the ocean. But this is just an average value, and so what you actually see in this graph, in the blue, on the top panel in the blue, you see areas that are already low in oxygen, and then in the second panel, in the blue, you see the areas that are going to lose the most oxygen and have lost oxygen already. And what you can see is that the areas that are already limited on oxygen are the ones that are losing the most oxygen. And so that's important. And you can actually see the expansion of these low oxygen areas through the water column. So between 1960 and today, you can see that the depth occupied by these low oxygen hypoxic areas in the water have expanded. And so what that means for us on the coastlines is as these areas expand, they also shoal, so they become shallower. They get closer to our coasts, and our coasts now actually face this low oxygen water that is coming up and affecting some of the fish. And we've seen off of the coast of California in the last 22 years a 21% decrease in mean oxygen content at about 300 meters, and coastally a shoaling of about 100 meters of the hypoxic layer. And so where that the depth of the hypoxic layer is what really affects a lot of your coastal organisms. And so what we can see when we look at physiology in the lab is that there are certain groups that are most sensitive to low oxygen. And we can look at this in terms of lethal concentrations, and so what causes an organism to die, or we can look at this with sublethal concentrations, so what causes an organism to grow less or to reproduce less. And we can see that for both of these, crustaceans and fish are our most sensitive groups. And we can see that in the lab, but we can also see that in the field. We have mortality events, large mortality events in the Gulf of Mexico. When you get a hypoxic area, you have a low oxygen event, you have dead fish. This is a really fast impact. We also see that off of the coast of Africa where there's low oxygen water that shoals. Crustaceans, lobsters will just walk out of the ocean because the oxygen is too low for them, and you'll have a widespread mortality event. And so we can see this most recently off of Oregon, where before the Oregon coastline did not have a lot of anoxic and hypoxic events, but recently, since 2002, because of the shoaling of this oxygen minimum zone and this low oxygen water, they've actually been experiencing a lot more low oxygen mortality events. And starting in 2002, they saw 75% mortality of the Dungeness crab, which is a really big, important fishery off of Oregon. And then also in these ROV surveys, you can see a healthy fish community prior to 2002, and then pretty much all of their ROV surveys after 2002 saw a lot of dead fish and invertebrates along the bottom because of these low oxygen events. And so what that means for the greater ocean, it results in habitat expansions and contractions. So there's some organisms that actually really like low oxygen because they've been adapted to it through evolutionary time. So this fish on the right actually does great with very low oxygen concentrations. And so organisms like that will see their range expand. But organisms that need high oxygen to survive, and so those are our tunas, our billfish, they actually are experiencing habitat contraction because all of a sudden they can't use as much of the water column as they did previously. And so we've already seen a 15% reduction in the habitat of tuna in the Atlantic because of the expansion of these low oxygen areas. There's also been a decline in mesopelagic fish. So these are small midwater fish that are really a very important component of the food web. They feed everything at the top levels of the food web, and so they're very sensitive to low oxygen. And then also we've seen habitat expansion of the Humboldt squid. So the Humboldt squid can do well in low oxygen conditions, and it actually has expanded all along the west coast of the US. And they compete with hake, and they also eat hake. So the hake fishery has not been doing as well, but the fishery on Humboldt squid has been doing better. And so a really important point is that low oxygen areas are carbon dioxide maximum areas. Whenever you use oxygen, you produce carbon dioxide. That's just through respiration. And so whenever we see an area that's low in oxygen, it's always high in carbon dioxide. So when we see the shoaling of these low oxygen areas, we actually see the shoaling of very low pH water. And so that's exactly what we've been seeing off of the west coast of the United States, where some of the water that's coming up is 7.6, 7.75, very, very low pH. And what that also means is it has very high CO2 concentrations. And so some of these waters are 1200, and for example, surface is 400 parts per million. And so this is actually water that is net fluxing carbon dioxide out of the water instead of taking it up. So there are some important feedback implications. So we really need to pay attention to ocean deoxygenation because it has very important biological effects. We know that it's declining, and we know that it will decline in the future with surface warming. And we know that it has important impacts for a lot of coastal economies. However, because it's such a new topic, it really hasn't had too much of a focus, and it didn't make it into the summary for policymakers, even though it's really a problem policymakers should be thinking about because it can impact their local economies. And so small changes in temperature can have very drastic impacts on oxygen content. So just a 1 degree increase in surface warming will triple your suboxic zones and increase your hypoxic areas by 10%. We know that it has profound consequences on biodiversity, on fisheries income, and we know that it also has environmental feedbacks in terms of greenhouse gas emissions because a really potent greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide, is produced in low oxygen areas. And in the historic record, we actually see that oxygen depleted areas in the ocean are very tightly correlated with warming periods. So we know how this works in the past. And so with that, I would just like to say thank you for listening to this presentation. And I'm here as a part of a group of Scripps students. We're graduate students, and we really want to try and communicate our research to more of a public policy audience as well as a public audience. And so there's more information about how climate change is affecting the oceans at this website, oceanscientist.org. And also there's an oceans booth here, 102 on this floor. So if you have any other questions about ocean impacts of climate change, please come and talk to us. So thank you.
Architecture is both kind of like one of the biggest responsibilities to carry when you consider the human development and the effects of human development, when you consider urbanization, population growth, the need for further and further and further development. And when you acknowledge that sort of the resources that are being consumed, wasted through construction, demolition processes, all of this, and you consider energy and climate change and carbon, etc., through the operation of buildings, you know, the responsibility upon the architects has changed in profile. There is no longer that kind of art for art's sake. We actually have a greater responsibility, and whilst the need for art is there, and make no mistake, there's, you know, our cities need to reflect our aspirations, they need to reflect our society, they need to reflect what is good about human creativity and nature. There is another layer of thinking that has to be brought to architecture in this current world, in these days now, which is a very much a social and an environmental responsibility that cannot be shirked and has to be addressed. And I just want to convince as many young up-and-coming architects as possible to think about architecture as a very, very important role player in the world going forwards, in terms of that responsibility, both in an artistic sense and a scientific sense in terms of performance and everything else. You know, there's an old modernist architecture axiom that talks about form follows function, and I prefer to think in terms of form follows flow. And I think about that in terms of the way the sun energy flows across a site, the way wind flows across a site, water, even people, even money, even all sorts of things. So one can sort of underpin a design in its social, economic, environmental context by considering the various different energies that are flowing and how to harness the power within that in order to generate architectural form and meaning. So you know, it's very much context-based. So I teach, and what I try to impress upon my students is that there's kind of three role players, in essence, in the architect's visualization or understanding of a project, and that would be the physical context of the project, so the piece of the planet whereupon it's going to happen, whether that be urban, rural, or whatever. That piece of earth will have various different attributes and sort of qualities about it. Then there's the brief or the program or the client of the project, and their needs out of the project is a very big design driver that architects can actually use to generate form, obviously. And then there's the architect themselves and what they bring to that process in terms of their identity, their worldview, their philosophies, their creative impulses. So it's sort of a very nice process whereby I see the architect as kind of like a matchmaker between a piece of ground and a client with a need, but that matchmaking happens through a very personal engagement with the project by the architect, bringing their own sensitivities to that project. we have a world now, and we have this thing called climate change, and the reality is that 40% of climate change is actually caused by architects. 40% of the world's energy is used in the operation and maintenance and production of buildings. So I point the finger at architects and I say it's your fault. And then I understand that, particularly in South Africa, architecture is being taught the way it was today, the way it was when I was a student. And what I'm saying is that there needs to be a complete and utter paradigm shift in the way that we understand architecture. Once you realize, or you point the finger at architects and say it's your fault, then something has to give, something has to change. So what I'm really sort of quite passionate about is bringing a, sort of dismantling this ivory tower idea that architects have, that they are these wonderful creators who visualize these beautiful constructs and they get realized. And I think, the way the world is heading is that in actual fact buildings should be designed around a table with a whole bunch of different expertise, including biologists, sociologists, physicists, and as well as engineers and architects and everywhere else. But again, bringing in that sort of systemic understanding of design and problem solving. And it's not really about creating objects anymore. That's like the time for that is gone. Yes, there are huge aesthetic and meaning and identity responsibilities on the architect to create beautiful buildings, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that is a sort of subjective debate that can go on forever. So what you can do is you can justify a design through process, through an understanding of what it is that you're doing and how you arrived at that solution. And provided that there is a sort of a sensitivity and a sensibility about aesthetics and about composition embedded in that understanding, then you should be okay. And that's kind of like where I try and focus my work and try and focus my teaching, that I try and bring to students a new methodology of architecture whereby they can actually explore these contextual issues in a lot of depth, and out of those issues they can draw a systemic understanding of how the building needs to operate and what it needs to produce or do or provide, and those considerations are then the generation of form, and through that generation of form the architect brings a sense of identity and meaning and purpose to that resolution. So it's a quite a different kind of approach where there's a lot less ego involved and a lot more subtlety in sort of the generation of form and identity in architecture. Students are so keen to learn this stuff, and that's in South Africa there just is not the capacity amongst the teaching staff. They don't know. They know what they were taught, and they've practiced the way they've taught, which is about meaning and identity and art and creativity. And what I'm saying is, that's all critically important, but there's absolutely another layer that everybody's running around designing vehicles with square wheels. That's what it basically amounts to. They're beautiful, beautiful cars, but they've got square wheels, and they don't actually work. We've got office buildings in Joburg that in winter, they get heated up in the morning, and they get cooled down in the afternoon, because they're so designed not around performance, around the idea of creating comfortable spaces inside with an outside environment that you have to understand and take into cognizance. So I see that outside environment as a resource, as a system of energies to use, to harness, to create comfort inside. Whereas most architects see it as kind of like an enemy that has to be shut off, and then we switch heaters on and we switch air conditioners on and we make this false environment on the inside. And that's not necessary. There is this filter, this relationship that could be developed between the inside and the outside of buildings, between the internal climate and the external climate, in terms of creating comfortable spaces that meet human needs for comfort and shelter. That's the biggest problem. That is the biggest problem, is that we actually need we need to intervene on those buildings in very, very clever ways, and that's not always very easy. But it can be done, and that's actually where I want my research to start going, is to start saying, okay, it's easy to design this perfect city on this green field site and reimagine how Joburg could have been developed. But this is how it is now. So how do you apply the same thinking at a building scale, at a room scale, at a street scale, at a neighborhood scale, at a district scale, at a city scale? How do you kind of reimagine the current infrastructure being messed with, eroded, sort of attacked, modified to be more responsive to the overall systemic understanding of what's going on? So that's kind of like where I'd like to take my work. The way I often talk about my buildings is that they sit in a landscape and they relate to that landscape very much, or they evolve in that landscape during the design process, very much the way an organism evolves in its ecosystem. So they tap into the available resources, and they concentrate on cyclic relationships, and these things are exploded up from an ecosystemic, traditional ecosystemic understanding to a more sort of to a more human contextualized ecosystemic understanding. So things like money, aspiration, purpose, meaning form part of that contextual relationship that the building positions itself within and responds to. There was one project where the client came to me and his objective was to have a house that was independent of the city council and was autonomous, what we call an island home. And because he didn't have trust or faith in the city council in the years to come. And that was a statement at the beginning of the project. By the end of the project took 2 years to design, and by the end of the design process he was a completely converted environmentalist, and he had taken on all of these other softer tissue agendas about responsibility, custodianship, and etc. So that was really a fantastic kind of process. Also, he was a very wealthy man, and he spared no expense at achieving his objectives, which is an incredibly high performance house. It was a private house, and one which was autonomous, so it makes its own electricity, it makes its own water, it treats its own waste, etc., and it's in a suburban context here in Johannesburg. And so that was like quite an interesting project, and what was really fascinating about that was the kind of aesthetic ideals or the aesthetic identity that came out of that design process was very much a performance-based concept, again realized. It could have been realized in any number of ways. So the way it gets realized is influenced or shaped or sort of pushed by both my sensibilities and the clients. So it was quite nice in that sense, and it's for me it's a nice project, and I was really fortunate that to be given that opportunity to actually work something through right to the very nth degree of realization. So it was a very satisfying process, and kind of like it was from there that my interest then moved on to cities, because I kind of like felt like, okay, that's cool, nailed it, time to get on. You know what I mean? My interests have quite largely, or are busy largely, moving from understanding buildings in this way to now starting to look at cities in this way. And in fact, I'm kind of like starting to research and focus on the idea of how we as people can develop sustainable cities which respond to this contextual understanding of ecosystemic, in terms of natural environment, human-made environments, things like politics and economics. I'm very interested in biomimicry, and there's the biomimicry. There has been a city designed upon biomimicry principles. It's also been used in Cape Town for the upgrading of certain areas. So those kind of projects one finds really interesting. I don't, I kind of like take a slightly different slant to that, because as an architect, my interest lies in a whole range of influences. And and aspects that drive a design process, whereas biomimicry is really, really very specifically focused upon a specific kind of methodology, whereas I've kind of developed my own methodology, which would include things like biomimicry, sustainability as understood in various different ways. So yeah, I mean, there are lots of architects that I look up to, although I'm notoriously bad at remembering names of projects and people. I mean, Norman Foster is somebody who I think I really sort of kind of like admire the way he approaches projects. Ken Yang, Renzo Piano. So these guys kind of have they have a very natural way of developing a design, which in a way, one kind of conceptual understanding or solution for a project enables a whole range of different factors or considerations that they are encompassing. And I think that that's a really kind of nice way to think about architecture. What I really kind of like push against, what I really don't like, is this very sort of form-based, the creative impulse that many architects have to build monuments, basically what I call monuments to their own egos and their own creativity, and these sort of sculpturesque objects. And I don't see architecture as objects in space. I see them as an organism that ties into an ecosystem in a whole range of different ways. And it's very kind of like monodimensional to think of it as an object. And very seldom do I have an idea of what the shape or form of this building should be. It usually evolves out of a process. And I'm very interested in that, in how the aesthetics and the design look and feel can actually evolve out of a sort of a methodology which is very much kind of like science underpinning, the science of the performance of buildings and the ecology of buildings, underpinning a kind of a conceptual, artistic, personal impulse to generate. You always have some kind of a personal idea of, the same solution could be solved that way or this way, but you prefer this way, because I prefer to think of that in terms of what other options does it open up, what other design opportunities does this option or that option open up. But nevertheless, there's always some kind of materiality or sort of ideology or philosophy or aesthetic that underpins the sort of objectives that you're aiming towards in the design of a building. My whole theory about cities that I'm busy working on basically kind of like looks at ecosystems, natural ecosystems, and how organisms evolve within those ecosystems. And whenever conditions change, you'll see certain species die out, or certain species will proliferate and prosper and flourish up to a certain point, but then when they reach over a critical point and they start actually damaging the ecosystemic whole, they start to die back. So nature has these wonderful sort of self-governing mechanisms. So, and it's basically all built around water. I mean, essentially that's the bottom line of human existence. So, in a physical sense. So my kind of whole idea is really looking at cities in that same way. So, for example, municipal boundaries would be demarcated by watersheds, and each municipality would be responsible for the management, the collection of rainwater, the management of that rainwater, the recycling and the delivery of fresh water to its own watershed area. And as soon as development had reached the limits of that water carrying watershed area, that's it, that's the limit to human development in that area, and now another watershed must be colonized for further human development. So you never overstress any one system too much. And then other little cute little ideas, like at the bottom of this watershed would be the collection dam where all this water sort of ends up, and the municipality offices would be located right there. So the first people to know about the water going bad or starting to smell wrong or so this sort of thing would be the municipality themselves, and their biggest functionality is in fact the management of the quality of that water. So if human development was organized around the principle, for example, of water, and land boundaries were organized with that sense, we could start looking at sustainable cities. And similarly, movement and transport in cities. I mean, the easiest way to walk up a mountain is to walk up the way water comes down a mountain. You follow the river up. And similarly, our sort of transport and the sort of the mechanisms by which we sort of move stuff around in our cities can be reinterpreted. The way we do roads, the way we do electricity obviously should be, there's this idea that in biomimicry, for example, that solutions should be nested and modular. So the idea of every single building being a power plant, producing electricity, using it, storing it, delivering it, sharing it, that's the sort of sensible, like plants in a natural environment. They all have symbiotic relationships with each other. They all provide services to each other. And one can imagine that same sort of thing in buildings and cities where one actually focuses, it's sort of systemic thinking where, because since the Renaissance we sort of developed this silo thinking where now you're either a doctor or you're a lawyer or you're a biologist or you're a physicist, and what we're sort of realizing now is that actually what's much more important is the relationships between elements rather than the element themselves. So systems thinking is now much more concerned about understanding those relationships, and I think for me that's what makes good architecture, good urbanity is understanding a systemic sort of system that whole entity sort of develops and lives within and propagates and is designed around, and those are the sort of design considerations. So kind of like that kind of says it all in a nutshell there.
We are from GeoAgro Africa. We do satellite monitoring, crop monitoring through satellite image. We monitor crops on a daily basis, where we can actually tell you if there's any stress on your plants, crops on a daily basis.
How do you manage that? How do you tell whether there's stress?
We do through infrared imagery.
Yes.
We can actually, if a plant's in stress, we can actually pick up, when a plant's in stress, it will actually radiate more infrared than a plant that is not under stress. So we can actually pick that up before you know anything about stress on your plant. We can pick that up and actually inform you, go out to that specific place in your crops, and you can actually see what the problem is.
What sort of thing would stress your plants?
Water, not water, insects, not enough pesticide or fertilizer. There's a lot of differences, a lot of problems.
Do pesticides stress a plant quite a lot?
Yes, it can stress, but we usually down now doing microbes on plants. We don't use actually pesticides, but we can monitor it.
You say you do microbes on plants. Will you explain that?
We're just putting back microbes if the ground is not old ground. We put in microbes back in the ground to get it more fertilized and get the good stuff back in plants, and then we monitor the plant.
Will those microbes live in polluted soil?
It will live. It actually will make the ground good. Yeah, that's very good.
Do you approve of fertilizers and chemicals?
No, we don't approve it. We are all biological microbes. We're not on the pesticides and fertilizers.
Do you believe that it is impossible to feed the world without chemicals and fertilizers? It's possible to feed the world with no.
Yes, it is.
says in one sentence.
It's possible to feed the world without fertilizer because there's microbes is in the ground and you can just use it. You have to just put it back in.
They're saying that microbes are the source of almost all immune systems.
Yes. When they went to Mars, they were looking for microbes, and that's the first sign of living material. So we're just putting it back in soil and make stuff happen. Make it bigger and juicier and put it back in.
Can I leave my bag here a sec? I just want to go and film that.
No problem.
Dog. Where do you get your microbes from?
From Microbial. Microbial is a South African-based company, but they've got factories in United States. They manufacture it there, and we're getting it from there. But it's a company that was first developed in South Africa, but they doing all the production in America. First in the world, the best.
I want to actually. Where are you based?
In Johannesburg. We're based in Johannesburg, but this little company is in George, the Western Cape.
And if I want to do a follow-up on this one, because this is interesting to what we're promoting.
Yeah. My name is Gerard Kuhn. Yeah.
And this is microbiome.
Biofarm Solutions, we use just organic and microbes. No pesticides, nothing. And we actually have the world record for onion production in seed. Yeah, just on microbes. We're doing a lot of on this products in the Eastern Cape on citrus. Because export, they don't use any chemicals. And then we monitor with satellite imagery.
Are farmers surprised when they start using microbiome and find their crops so good?
They're surprised. They think fertilizers will do that, and then they use microbes. Boom. Much more juicier.
Do they ever go back?
Never. They're first a bit skeptic about the product because we've got a little bottle of microbes about 100 millimeter where you can treat about 5 hectares with that. There's about 10 to about 12 billion microbes in that little bottle. And it can stand heat with up to 80 degrees, so it will last and last and last. We actually do chicken manure where we coat it with microbes and then put it in fertilizer. First in the world as well.
And then how do they apply that for microbiome?
How do they apply
They put it in the watering system?
In water systems, yeah. Sprinklers, you put it in, it's all liquid based, you put it all in water systems and pops your uncle.
Then they never use poison again?
Never. We can treat pesticides with natural stuff, natural elements, no pesticides, nothing.
Wow.
You can actually taste the difference in oranges, organic versus it's sweeter, better, the color is more beautiful. I'm actually very enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, no, that's
with the satellite imagery it's very nice. You can see actually the stress on a plant days before you can see it. We will show you, we will call you, listen here, there's some problems in your...
Even though you don't know the person, you can see them from the satellite.
You can see it from a satellite. It's all infrared, and you can see on that spot there's that tree. It's under stress. Maybe it's some different chemicals they use, or there's some water points that not working. So you can point it to that direction, go and see what's the problem.
Wow, amazing. All from infrared.
All from infrared, yeah. Because the green plants taking more light and sending out less infrared. When a plant's in stretch, it will take less light and send more infrared, so you can actually pick that up. And now we can also see the evaporation of water. If there's less evaporation in your fields, dam levels, we can monitor that as well through satellite imagery.
Are you noticing a lot of stress now where the plants are all being hit by drought?
Yes, you can see that.
Must be like a danger signal.
Danger signal, but when you irrigate them, no problem with that.
funny, they actually have done tests
Yes.
on plants using lie detectors. And the plants that have something cut off, they found out what plants like and what they don't like by watching their stress levels from lie detectors. But the infrared would have been easier for them.
Much easier.
And one thing they found out was that plants knew they did a control thing that they said everybody must walk into this building. One of them was going to destroy their plants. Plants knew when that person entered the room, they all were very stressed. They knew that, but he was the one who was going to be destroying the plant in front of the others.
Nice. And with this we can do scouting to a specific plant, take pictures of it, upload it to your system, and you can actually see the difference before and after with your satellite imagery. It's nice system to have.
I'm going to keep in touch anyway.
Definitely, yeah. Actually, my boss too is actually a fundi on microbes. I love working with this GIS software because I'm a farmer of heart and I love doing them. But I'm passionate about ground.
Do you grow your own food?
Yes, I do. I love doing my own food, plant my own feed stuff.
And you reckon it's actually quite easy?
It's quite easy.
Yeah.
You don't need all expensive stuff to grow your own. You've got everything in the ground. You just need to use it. Citrus, oranges. Orange. Let me just go back. Problem on your orange. There was a. It was called Phytophthora. It's like a. What do you call it? Sickness on your trees. That little. And that little was. There was no irrigation. It was problem with your irrigation pipe, so you can actually pick that up on your satellite imagery. Just let me show you this. Here's the factory in the US, where they develop for microbial. All the microbes, the whole factory. It's all in America, but actually, I'm not in. What can I say about that? Passionate.
Keep away pests from the countries, so they don't have to spray anything.
Yes, and that's companion planting, and they put
Companion
marigolds
planting, yeah.
and calendulas. And I mean, I don't know about those dianthus, but look at those extraordinary artichokes there.
Yeah, amazing. Older, like the young guys are very ignorant.
Yeah.
But the older, yeah. But he probably prefer a few Zimbabweans because he can speak Shona and local Zimbabwe.
I wonder why they put the plastic there.
Down there,
Weed control maybe.
Oh, look at this. This is This is a insect wall, or an animal wall, that is so clever. It's based on the hedgerows in England, or I suppose in Europe. And each of those sort of areas could be a little house for wild mice, or insects and bees, and I suppose maybe not bees, but little birds. I don't know about the companion here, ship here.
They get used to going here, don't they?
Yeah. It's delightful. Yeah. But look at the beautiful
So cute,
texture. I mean, the shapes and forms, and it's one of the nicest I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I saw one of these. I saw one of these in at.
Like it's an apartment for insects and
Yeah.
rats.
There you go.
It's so extensive, isn't it? Yeah. And I also like the maybe
This is really. This is more. Flowers that I planted at Monkey Valley entrance. They're part of the carnation family.
Do they do bees?
And pansies, they're also the edible flowers. So like this organic, beautiful organic salad. And I put this in front, but it's all to be eaten, and then it attracts the pollinators. And then maybe instead of the vegetables, they go for the flowers and actually pollinate and create the abundance. It is a strange one, I mean, but they're being edible flowers. I think the dianthus. That's little violets, which are also beautiful edible flowers.
Chives, is that chives?
And then there's chives in there, and
what is
funny,
the flat leaf
one?
That also looks like primulas.
It looks like foxgloves. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just getting the gist of it.
Yeah.
But now I want to, in amongst this garden, can you talk to me about the other things?
Talking about
yes,
the drift.
okay.
Oh, and the right, what right have people to spray poisons?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's making other people sick. It's not fair.
So there needs to be some kind of control, and the looking into the poisoning of our earth, and then the poisoning of the human being, because we're the rights of the Constitution to clean air, clean arable sand or food, and the water. And if you think that the spraying is affecting all the elements that bring and create life, it's just such a shocking thing. And to think that you've been so severely affected by the spraying in this beautiful area. So the beauty, if it is then edible, has been a source of poisoning.
Yeah.
Where this beautiful garden at Boschendal shows just the abundance that can be there, just with a little bit of care and no spraying, utilizing compost and putting back in the whole web of life. And this is how it should be. So sad to have seen the spraying in the beautiful blossom trees and the orchards earlier on, and to hear your story, Vanessa.
Now to be in a rural district is very unhealthy.
Yeah, the mixture of the herbs and the mints. carbon cable, it's all ball. Yes, yes. So people can offset the travel mileages and things with buying trees for Africa. I always wondered. Pepino. Oh, pepinos. Pepino.
Pepino.
Melon, but it doesn't look like. This is what's so great is that they.
This would be great for your little veggie garden.
Yes.
So that it's
I think so because it would get rid of the mold problem.
Yeah, it's lifted and higher.
Lifted raised beds, yeah. In wooden crates.
But it's pretty costly. I've seen this before. The Pinot melons. And these are one of the companion plants that are used to keep the insects away, and they're really good for making poultices and anti-inflammatory. That's a calendula. Also for eating. So probably some in the pack here. Pansy, little pansies in the organic salad. And there's lavender that can be eaten, such an amazing healer. And there's just the little petals of the calendula. And yeah, the dianthuses over here. So you have a very beautiful looking salad, but they've all got their own healing spirit within their colour, within the vibration of the plant. They have different qualities.
Well, it does look like it's a bit of
But they use poison here too, it looks like, eh?
a little bit.
Have a meeting with the management has asked what they spray.
They use the synchro and so I don't know how to do it.
Otherwise the baby shouldn't be.
It's not poison because it's organic synchro, because they use the synchro and guana. So I don't use the chemicals because they don't like GMO in their farm. So it's better.
No GMO also good.
Yeah, so if you use I like organic farm because organic farm is good. It's good more than I can say.
It's good morally.
Yeah, it's good because. But when I'm started, I didn't know nothing about the organic. I know even agriculture. I just come here and say I see the food. Where the food is coming from.
Yes.
Do they grow everything
and now,
here?
You know,
yeah, you grow everything here. Like,
do they have potatoes somewhere here?
Potato, but because it's a first day today, I don't know where. But my spirit can use the potato. You can plant potato even inside the tire. You can plant even the bags if you don't want to plant in the ground. Because when you're harvesting, you're gonna damage a lot of potatoes. So it's better when you're gonna plant in the tire or you're gonna plant in the bags.
Okay.
So now I was just saying that we've only started to use commercial when monoculture started, and when we had to produce lots of food inexpensively, and that's where chemicals came in from. But I mean, this is chemical free, so.
Is it inexpensive to grow with chemicals? Surely the chemicals make it expensive.
No, well, chemicals is a very sort of. Let's take Roundup for instance. Roundup is glyphosate, and that's a weed killer, and a few parts per million can kill a few hectares of weeds around your vegetables. So, but it's toxic. So no, it's very inexpensive to use chemicals.
It's inexpensive, but it's expensive in what it does to your planet.
That's the expensive part. But I mean, the past few years, there's a whole community that's focusing on microbes. That's naturally in the soil, and yeah, we're focusing, we're going back to the soil and how it was done, how my grandfather's grandfather did it, and that's, I mean, you can look at the amount of cancer that's available to the, it's astonishing. And that time my grandfather told me that it was weird if someone got cancer. It was, and now it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So no, the link is easy.
And do you think that it's possible to grow enough food for our population without using chemicals?
Look, it's we are a very the population has grown and is growing daily, and there's a massive food crisis. But I think if everyone could stand together in a way, if
When you think of it, we throw most of the food away. 60% of all food gets thrown away.
Yeah.
And a lot of the food then gets turned refined and poisoned by the additives, so then you can't use it anyway. And a lot of food is just GM, so what's the point of all that food? That's not even nutrition.
Yeah, there's enough food for everyone twice over on this planet, but like you said, if what's happening? I mean, what are we doing wrong? And yeah, it's a difficult one. I think if the key should be if everyone could just maybe stand together and start knowing what's going on in the soil in your backyard, and applying earthworm, for instance, applying earthworm juice to your vegetable garden. I mean, if the plant's healthy, then take for instance the cell wall of a plant. It's made out of a combination of elements, but calcium being the main one. If you look only into your calcium needs of the plant, then it's difficult for diseases and fungi to penetrate the plant, so they just move on, and small insects. So it's basic things. It's science that's going to win this, and knowing your soil and knowing your plants and knowing how it works. And if everyone can get like a base crash course on how it works, then you won't go to your Agrimark and buy something that kills the snails, and obviously then kills the earthworms and kills everything around it, but you've got your one lettuce. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and also it ends up in the sea. Now the sea is dying.
Nutrient leaching, yeah.
80% of all chemicals and hair shampoos and soaps, everything ends up in the sea.
There's a in obviously the sea. You've got that whole conveyor, the plankton conveyor, the chlorophyll. What's that? The algae.
Phytoplankton.
Phytoplankton, and if they die off, the whole system will shut down.
At the moment, the latest study that was released about 6 weeks ago, results of a 30-year study were released that said that at the present rate of decline of oxygen levels in the sea and the phytoplankton decline, there will be no oxygen in the sea virtually by 2030. And since they produce 50 to 65% of all the oxygen, including the land oxygen, that's probably going to have a big effect on us. We believe that the whole advantage of organic farming is that the one thing that can change that around, the fastest way we can take the carbon dioxide out of circulation and cool the planet, is to build up the microbiome underneath the soil. And they can only do that if you stop poisoning them and stop leaving them bare and get
exactly.
Yeah.
Like for instance, making compost, like everyone did 100 years ago. It's making compost and getting that in your soil. Compost produces a acid called humic acid, and humic acid is one of the most important acids that we need. And what it does, it holds everything together. So now when it starts raining, everything just stays where it is, and everything doesn't wash out and move into the rivers and the rivers into the sea. So the whole thing could be just compost, just one thing to change 20%, 30% of the whole system. And composting, I mean, what's so difficult about making compost and using it and eating healthy vegetables from that?
It's almost impossible to make compost if you use genetically modified food, because it doesn't break down at all. The bacteria don't like it any more than our bodies.
Yeah. Look, there's you have to remember there's good GM and then there's bad GM. I've seen good GM where they, like for instance in India, they had a bacteria that that sort of attacked the pawpaw. I don't know what's a pawpaw in English.
The same thing.
Is it a pawpaw? And what they found is they genetically modified the fungi that's doing that, and they induced that in an early stage into the fruit. But when it was at a natural stage and you would eat that pawpaw, it was almost at a toxic level. But inducing it in the beginning and putting that fungi in the seed from the beginning, it sort of the pawpaw was now available for the people to eat again, and it was at such a level, at such a holistic level that it was a good GM.
On the whole, there's no such thing as a good GM, because they said the same thing about the same one that perforates the stomach lining of beetles. They said it was too small to damage anybody else, but at the moment there's a condition called leaky guts in cattle.
Okay.
30% of animals die from it, and it also goes into humans. It's also creating our food intolerances, and it's because it isn't what they say. It isn't so harmless, and it actually creates a condition of leaky guts in everything. Okay. And that means that undigested food is passing directly into the bloodstream. It's causing the food allergies, and it's causing the leaky gut system syndrome.
No, point taken. I mean, yeah, I think everything should be researched, and you seem like you do your research, so I like that.
Thank you.
This is her baby, and they're doing all of this vegetables. I'm taking on a 3 hectare complete organic production area. So this is the aesthetic area, and then there's a production area that I'm starting, which is like this but more intense organics.
And will you use the shade cloth?
No, I'm going to do it in old school way.
Oh, okay. Will you use the above the ground system, or will you use the in the ground system?
What do you mean?
Well, I noticed lots of people put these poles and they build it up and they put it slightly higher above the ground.
Oh no, in the soils, like I said, old school. Like we even gonna plow with horses and stuff like that.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
Where are you going to do this?
It's just down here. Well, behind this poplar sort of forest, there's a 2 hectare.
How many hectares is this garden on our
This
right?
and this included is about 2.5.
Wow.
Wow.
And does it produce quite a lot of food? Have you got any idea?
It does produce lots of food, but what this garden is about is what she wanted to do is to show the whole effect of permaculture and how animals and the whole system can work together. So this works, but this is not sort of put together for production. It's put together to display a model of permaculture. Yeah.
But where do all the vegetables go?
So everything that you eat or drink in this restaurant or the werf, that's where that go, and then external restaurants and chefs.
So you are selling it out as well?
Yes. Well, for instance, we're struggling to get potato seeds because potatoes, the potato industry had a big knock because of the drought. Because I may be wrong, but this is my theory. But all the water that when the world started is still in circulation. It can't go out, so it moves around. So the water and everything moves around, and I think the water is now going to. There is going to be areas that's going to struggle and become sort of desert-like, but I think there's areas that will get more rain than what they expected to get. The problem is not the weeds and stuff. The problem is a fruit fly that comes in and stings and lays his eggs. So you can bait them, and you can. We've actually did a 2-day seminar now with I consider one of the best soil scientists alive, and they and a company called Real IPM. Her name is Jean. Not sure her surname, but her name is Jean, and they're doing amazing work with fungi. So what they're doing is they're growing fungi that attacks insects. So the fungi will literally live off the insects and eat them from the inside and spore, and so you'll have aphids or whatever, and you spray this fungi over them, which is a natural thing, and they sort of sit onto the insect, and they literally just goes into the cracks, the exoskeleton of the animal, and they start just living. And a few days later, that same insect will sit there, but if you look closely, it's sort of almost like when you left bread in the fridge for too long, it's moldy. It's just coming out of the insect, and that is the next step. Is taking biology.
And there's no effect on us. It's not going to suddenly become the dreaded killer.
It's actually going to make you. It's almost a biotic. So no, it's a good thing. So that's where we're moving to. What people sometimes don't understand, that there's I myself, I'm sort of I'm a tree hugger in a way, but we have to embrace science, and there's lots of stuff out there that says no, just mix this and mix this peel with this and spray it there, and but I mean, you're talking about a 200 hectare, 240 hectare fruit system, where there's multiple layers of this fly. So it's really difficult. For the home grower, yes, I can believe that something like that can work, but on a massive scale, and that's why I take my hat off for these guys and for the CEO, which is the main sort of seed planter in us. But what he's doing is he's taking part in a system where we move from the conventional, and we're starting with we've started with pigs, and we're taking this whole thing into what it was, but we're doing it on a massive scale, and we're doing it on a scale that works and that is profitable. That's the main thing, because it's sustainable agriculture. So even Jacques, the guy that's responsible for all the fruit trees, he's an amazing guy, and he's following science, and he's moving from biological, and everything is moving. So I'm very excited. We're in a very interesting time, actually. There's still guys out there that does the wrong thing, and sometimes that pays, which is the sad thing. But there's big influential people out there that's making a difference.
Just too late.
The damage is done, and I don't know. I think I don't know if you want that on camera, but
please,
I think if not all of the farms tomorrow will start doing what we are doing here, it's gonna crash and burn.
Planet-wide, you're talking about?
Yeah.
You influence your neighbors. Can you talk to them?
You can. I mean, we did the seminar, and farmers from all over came, and you saw this one guy. I laughed when I heard it, but and one of the breaks, I walked out and I went to the bathroom, and he was on the phone, this farmer, and he said, "No, stop all the Roundup. You can't believe how these guys are going on about this chemical. Stop it now." Wow. And it's amazing. And that's because of the science and people coming forward with
It's actually banned in a whole lot of countries since last year.
Yeah.
Roundup.
Yeah.
That's great. So there are
So
some
it's
good
moving,
things, yeah.
but we have to move quick. That's the thing. There's guys that says that we're not going to see 2050. So we need.
And that's happening because of the chemicals.
Excuse me?
And that's happening partly because of the chemicals, because the phytoplankton are affected partly by the heat, but mostly by the chemicals. And put it this way, the heat is coming about because the biome in the soil is going down so fast.
Yes.
You need the biome here to really thrive.
Yeah.
And don't know how quickly you can get it back. 7 years is almost too long. You know, you've only got 14. You don't want to take 7 years before it can be organic status.
Yeah, no, it's like I don't have an answer. I wish that there's a quick fix here, but we need a mind shift, and we need it yesterday. But I'd love you to meet Megan. She's amazing. I'm gonna go get her quick.
Yeah, and pretty much run this garden on their own.
Are they all organic experts, kind of thing?
I'd say so. You guys could start gardens at home now, chemical free.
plants, and I don't want. If the insects doesn't want to eat it, I don't want to eat it.
That's a bit changing.
So-
my
That's a nice attitude, eh?
point.
I mean, yeah, they're obviously more sensitive than I am. So, well, I think I am more sensitive than they are. So I don't know what it's going to do to my system if they don't want to eat it. So
Well, that's what GM, GM, the bacteria don't eat it.
Wow.
Her husband is a permaculture farmer. He's actually Mr. Permaculture of Africa, basically, in my
Wow.
opinion. And I film him a lot, because I've been for a long time.
He's experienced.
Squin, he's doing organic. He's doing organic bread, and he's starting to get it
yes,
out to
that
farmers
in
and to
Stellenbosch,
farm staff and everyone.
But
Because
where
wha-
does he get his flour from?
From a guy called James Moffat from Bloemfontein.
Where does he get it?
He grows it. He grows
He grows
organic.
it? Is he the only one who grows it?
Yeah.
So there is organic.
Eureka, is that non-organic? That's organic.
I don't
isn't it?
know.
No,
Well, it's not GM.
organic.
It's not GM.
So they also want to bring out organic beer and everything. And he came to Cape Town, and he's going to see if he can divert all the farmers into that model.
Really? Really? Oh, that's
Okay, all right. Boschendal was recently bought up by new investors who are very passionate about the environment and have based the new Boschendal ethos very much upon sustainability. So there have been some major changes recently and a very big swing to supplying organically grown produce, eggs, beef, chickens, and obviously vegetables. So that was my brief when I started here, was to be able to grow organically grown stuff for all the catering concerns on Boschendal. We're very fortunate to have some surplus. So I have been supplying online organic shops in Cape Town and other chefs and restaurants and hotels, etc., in the area. Yeah, and I think for me the greatest thing about this space is that it provides a platform to educate people about organic food growing. So it's been a very special space and time for me here on Boschendal. For the public, obviously health. I'm very pro using food as more than just nutrition, but almost as a medicine. I think we underestimate the healing abilities of our food, but it goes beyond the advantages of humans. For me, probably the most important thing is that there's very little impact on the environment, and that we're leaving something untouched for our children. I think the fact that we're damaging our soils, that we are losing astronomical amounts of topsoil every year. The statistics are horrific. If we carry on the way we're carrying on now, we won't have good enough soil to grow food in. So we're putting a lot of things at risk, not just our soils, the whole system. We really do not understand how dependent we are as human beings on the agricultural system. And if our food system collapses, I think we're going to be in very big trouble. We don't need them. I think the wool's been pulled over our eyes. We definitely don't need them. We've proven time and time again in organic food growing processes that we have everything at our disposal to grow our food. Plants aren't much different to human beings if they're healthy and their source of nutrition is healthy. They don't get sick. Very much like us. There's no need for chemicals. Look, without getting too much into the conspiracy theories, etc., I think a lot of our chemicals are based on surpluses and byproducts from the petro industry boom. A lot of technology and chemicals were developed during some of the major wars we had in the early part of last century, and they needed to do something with all of that left over, I guess. So I think that's where all the nonsense started. And it's about money at the end of the day. Quick buck. Personally, I would love to see more and more of us, specifically in urban environments, growing our own food. We all have the ability to grow a huge amount of food, which will enable us to share with others. But I think it goes beyond sharing surplus. It's about sharing knowledge and equipping people and inspiring people. And I think inspiring independence more than anything else. We're too system dependent. If we can take control of our own lives and take responsibility for our own wellness, there'd be a lot less drama in the world. I think definitely the inclusion of food growing skills into our school curricula. Definitely. I think it's sad for me to see how few children are still in contact with their food and actually understand where it comes from. I think that's a good start. Children are amazing. Such little ambassadors. If you plant a good seed in a child, you have a champion, an environmental champion for the rest of that child's or human being's life. I would most definitely ban the rake. I believe that we overexpose our soils, and it's time to accept that trees lose leaves for a reason and leave them there. They're good for the soil. And I'd maybe ban the straight line too. There's so much we can learn from nature. We need to observe what nature does more and understand how natural systems work. There's no need for chemical. We have everything at our disposal to grow healthy food. Look, beyond just the fact that genetics are being messed with, to me the biggest or the frightening thing, component of genetically modified foods is the glyphosate link. We are too obsessed and absolutely dependent, or we think we're dependent on herbicide, and we are damaging our water systems, we are damaging our guts, we are exposing ourselves to horrendous carcinogens. It's got to go, it's got to end. I think definitely educating our children. I can't express that enough. Definitely more education, environmental education, food education, medicine education. Our children need to know. They need to be equipped for what's waiting for them. That they don't make the same mistakes our generations will before did. Big focus on kids.
Yesterday I released a document that was in relation to, there was a news article came out that the minister was basically trying to play down the costs of solar power. They said that the solar power plants were costing them between 50 and 62 billion over the course of his 20-year contract. And as a result it was too expensive, and therefore South Africa was using it to justify the need to move over to nuclear. And there's a whole lot of back-end politics that goes in with that. Anybody that's in the renewable energy industry knows that it's an absolute load of rubbish, because a solar plant, and in this case they're referring to a 100 megawatt solar plant, for us to build a 100 megawatt solar plant costs us roughly 2 billion rand, and therefore it makes no sense as to why you would enter into a contract for 60 billion when the actual cost of the plant is 2 billion, and it makes its power from the sun exactly the same way that these people are going to be doing it. So why wouldn't local municipalities, Eskom, etc., whoever, why wouldn't they just build their own plant and pay some people for maintenance, and that's it? And then it wouldn't cost them 60 billion rand, because ultimately renewable, what I proved inside that letter, is a far cheaper form of power. And then in addition to it, I brought into the environmental benefits in terms of the amount of charcoal that is used by coal fire, the amount of water that is used by coal fire, 1.32 litres of water per kilowatt hour of energy, 1.32 litres, ludicrous. 1 kilogram of coal burned for 1 kilowatt of energy, 1 kilowatt hour of energy. I mean, it's absolute madness. So then I went on to nuclear, and I just explained the whole process of uranium and the cost, the CO2 costs that are associated with it. And I summarized basically by offering to show them supporting documentation that proves how much a solar plant costs on a cost sale basis on that scale, which is 100 megawatts. And at the end of the day, we are being completely misled. This has become a political tossing ground. What they're really trying to do is they have an intention, a small group of people have an intention to try and go with a beneficial kind of contract system where other people are making astronomical amounts of money that is costing us, the taxpayer, and also the consumer of that power. We are having to pay for this, and for no reason. And they're misleading us as to why they're doing that, and that's what that document was about.
No, I think it's very important that we have to make sure that we look after the land, the soil, the whole environment, and to save that for the future. We actually borrow, all of us borrow actually the land from our children and from their children. And we have to make sure that we hand it over to them in such a manner that they also can make use of that in a sustainable manner.
Are you aware that the amount of oxygen, they've just completed, because we do a lot of research for Mother Channel television, and are you aware that a 30-year study has just been concluded that says that the diminishing oxygen levels in the sea caused by increasing heat and increasing pollution, and that therefore the killing the phytoplankton, the little small plants in the sea, that means that there's going to be no oxygen in the sea virtually by the year 2030.
Now, I was not aware of that study, so this is for me something I heard of it today now from you, so I'm not aware of that.
Do you mind if I contact you again once I've shown you the study, and then you see if you've got any ideas?
Yeah, for sure, we can discuss it once again. I came from Pretoria, I'm not from this area, but you are more than welcome to contact us, because for us we have only one purpose as an organization, and that is to try to keep a commercial farmer safe and in production on a sustainable basis on his farm. That is for us the purpose as an organization, and TAU SA is looking for that, and everything that can make a positive contribution to that, we will actually support that, and if it's negative, we will try to address it and looking for a solution. Now, I think that the biggest asset that any government in these days in the world they do have is a commercial farmer in production. In South Africa, 67% of our population is already urbanized, and therefore we need for sure commercial farmers to make sure that they produce food for the market, and that should be on a sustainable basis, and that is something that you should bring into balance. That should be profitable for them, but they also should have to look after the land, the soil, the water, to make sure that it will be there next year again, that we can produce food again. And that is the most important thing for us as farmers, and it is for us a privilege to be in that section of the economy to make that contribution.
Are you yourself a farmer?
I used to be one. At this stage I'm only a small-scale farmer, but I'm full-time in the organization.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Jason, before we talk to the viewers again about what's happening in the electricity world, could you just tell people at home, because we've had a lot of questions on this, about what is a megawatt, what is a kilowatt, what is a watt, how much do people use, what's the difference, what's kilowatt hours?
Okay,
that whole thing.
So I'll run the quick math. Mm-hmm. There are 1,000 watts in a kilowatt.
Right.
So that's like 10 100 watt light bulbs. There are 1,000 kilowatts in a megawatt.
Right.
1,000 megawatts in a gigawatt.
A gigawatt.
Right.
1,000 megawatts.
Right. So South Africa uses 236,000, something like this, 240,000 gigawatt hours of energy.
Wait, we haven't said what a gigawatt is.
So that's 1,000 megawatts.
1,000 megawatts.
Right. And a megawatt, 1 megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So as an example, if you look at your electricity bill, they have a thing called a kWh, which is kilowatt hour.
Right.
So a kilowatt hour is the total amount of kilowatts used over the period of a day. Now in Eskom's case, it is the period of a day, but it can also be if you burn whatever. So if you take 5 kilowatts, you burn it for whatever, 1 hour, it's a 5 kilowatt hour. It's the total amount of energy used within a time frame, a period.
Right.
But the way that it's reflected on your bill is reflected generally for your daily consumption. It's normally averaged.
Right.
So at the end of a month, they will say you've used 486 kilowatt hours. That's your total usage of energy or electricity.
You build for kilowatt hours.
You're building kilowatt hours.
All over the world.
Right. So now what you would normally do, and I'm going to use easy numbers. Okay. So let's say for argument's sake, your bill at the end of the month is for 300 kilowatt hours. you are then charged normally on what's called a tariff, rate, which is normally like whatever, R1.50, R1.80 per kilowatt hour.
Right.
So they would take that, whatever the figure is, depending if you prepaid or whatever tariff code you're on, and they multiply it by your usage, which is the 300 kilowatt hours. And that's how they determine what your electricity cost is.
Right.
On top of that, they generally would add some other services, line lease costs, that kind of stuff. They would add that, but what we're referring to here is electricity costs.
Now, there is about something like, is it 8,000 hours in a year, or something like that.
Okay.
So if you have an installation that puts out 10 megawatts, does that mean it can put out 10 megawatts times 8,000 hours in a year?
Right, so you get viable output. A 10, for instance, a 10 megawatt, or let's use something smaller, a 10 kilowatt or whatever, any size of solar array.
Right.
It will have what we call peak generation, which is over your primary arc in terms of sunlight. Generally, the rule is 15% before those hours, 15% after those hours. Is not full production.
Right.
So to get slightly more technical, a solar panel is rated by something called a STC, which is a standard test condition.
Okay.
And what that means is, if you have a 250 watt solar panel, what they do is they lay it over a sunbed, and that sunbed puts out 1,000 watts per square meter. And based on the impact of the sunlight, the amount of electricity it generates, they rate that solar panel. Now, to come back to your question, if you put one of those solar panels at a good position, at a good angle, up onto your roof, and you leave it for the day, in the early morning, say between 8 and whatever, 10 o'clock, you're not going to get full generation.
Right.
So that solar panel, even though it's a 250 watt solar panel, it's not going to produce 250 watts.
Okay.
Because the incidence of the sunlight on the solar panel is not direct. So it will underproduce. It will maybe do whatever, 180 watts or all the way down to zero.
So when you get just to kind of...
So to come back to your original question,
okay.
Inside of a day, we as renewable energy people, we take what's called an engineering norm, which is we always work with 5.5 hours.
So when we've got a 250 watt solar panel, that is what it does at the peak of sunlight.
Yeah.
But it might be less at different times of the day.
Correct, yeah.
But to return that to our original question about kilowatt hours per year,
right,
and the relationship between a certain installation and the number of kilowatt hours.
Right.
So kilowatts to kilowatt hours. People want to understand what's the difference. How does that work?
Right. So when they talk about 100 megawatts, it's what we call about 100 megawatts deployed, meaning that they'll put up. So put it in easier terms, but they'll put up 100 megawatts of solar panels on the ground.
Right.
They're not telling you how much it's going to produce for the day. They're not saying. So the expectation generally would be is that you should pick up 550 megawatts or half a gigawatt of output from a 100 megawatt plant. So there's a difference.
Numbers again. There's a 100 megawatt.
So if you've got 100, we work on a standard saying that even though the sun comes up in its daytime for you, from whatever 7 in the morning, and at 7 at night it goes down, and that's 12 hours. We don't calculate based on 12 hours. In areas like Dar or these kind of areas, you can calculate on 6 hours or 6.5 hours or whatever. But what I'm trying to say is that we always calculate on a minimum standard, which is normally 5.5 hours.
Okay.
So when I design a 100 megawatt array, my expectation is for it to work for 5.5 hours of the day at full production.
And that would be how many kilowatt hours then?
So if you had 100 megawatts that was producing at 5.5 hours, you would have 550 megawatts.
Right, okay, got it.
But that, because there's 1,000 megawatts in a gigawatt, it's the same thing as saying it's just over half a gigawatt.
Right.
But that's production. So but what they're talking about in the newspaper, which is why we're having this discussion, is they're talking about a 100 megawatt plant, and what that means is 100 megawatts deployed.
Right.
So on the ground, if it's 10 solar panel, 10 or whatever, if it's 4 250 watt solar panels, that's a kilowatt deployed.
Okay.
If it's whatever, It's what you put on the ground, and there's nothing to do with how much power it makes. Now, what the minister was referring to, and what NERSA was referring to in that article, was they were saying that we have been bound by a power purchase agreement, which is what the IPP is. It's the power purchase, but it's power purchase agreement, PPA. And what it is they are bound at a certain rate. So a developer comes to the minister, says, hello minister, I'm responding to your bid, and we're going to put out this bid, and we're going to offer you electricity at R1.05 per kilowatt hour. Or per whatever, with R2.80 per kilowatt, whatever their value is. So they are basically selling electricity to Eskom. Eskom then signs an agreement saying, I accept that, and I will utilize that, and I can on-sell that.
Okay. And on the production of that electricity, if it was nuclear or if it was coal, how would the whole kilowatt hour thing work with the...
Right, so they do exactly the same thing. So you don't judge okay, so first of all nuclear, coal, petroleum, natural gas, all of them, they all use steam turbines. Those turbines have a rating, either, whatever, they're 550 meg or 500 megawatts. That's their rating, that is their deployed. Medupi is rated at 4,700 megawatts. It means that they have turbines in there that are rated at 4,700 megawatts. So when you switch it on, that will produce 4,700 megawatts every hour. Every hour it will produce it. So over the course of a day, obviously it's a massive amount of power, massive amount of energy there. But the reality is that if you take a look at Medupi, so Medupi was initially intended to cost 5.4 billion rand in this case.
Okay.
Actually, I think I converted to US dollars, but anyway, so it meant to cost 5.4. I think it's billion US dollars for the construction. It's the largest coal-fired power station in the world. Well, once it's completed, it will be.
Okay.
However, after 2 years, they said no, they were unable to complete it. There was issues with it, and the costs went up.
Okay.
Now they're sitting on, it's almost year 10. They still haven't completed the plant. It's still not fully functional. It's almost doubled in cost in terms of what they originally stated it was going to cost.
Okay.
Now that is not always the norm with coal-fired. Coal-fired is not as inaccurate as that traditionally.
Right.
But there is a technology that is, the norm, and that's nuclear. Nuclear forever comes in over cost, over budget, over time.
Like the French one in the UK.
Yeah. So the same story. I mean, like everything, whatever you loan originally to meet the cost of production for a nuclear plant is inevitably going to overrun all budgets, and it scares people. It scares countries. If you're signing up a deal for 1.4 billion euro and to produce it, in the back of your head, you've got to be starting to worry about, hang on, this could actually cost us 2.4, 3.4, whatever it is, 100 billion euro, whatever. It's the same figure. In your mind, you know that is not a persistent figure.
Right.
And so there's problems with it. And then aside from the problems with it, a lot of countries in Europe, they export the nuclear waste. Ironically, this country, South Africa, was picked up as importing. We're registered as an importer of nuclear waste. God knows what we do with it.
I wonder.
But that nuclear waste goes somewhere,
Valplatz.
Sorry?
Valplatz.
Okay, so there you go. But I mean, and that's just from one nuclear facility or a group of nuclear facilities in single place, and we're importing it here. But all over the world, there is byproduct. In Coburg buries on site. So that means that even long after Coburg has ceased to operate, that ground will have nuclear waste.
Okay.
But nuclear waste is not actually the big problem, so much the big problem. I mean, nuclear waste is never nice, no matter what you do. But there's other problems. So nuclear has to desalinate the water and to
Before we go into the other problems, just on the kilowatt hour thing, how long? It's 5.5 hours on average for solar per day for a coal-fired reactor.
No, so they run 24 hours.
They run 24 hours.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're load dependent, so they're demand side dependent.
Okay, because sometimes they disengage for a while. We've heard about that.
Yes, so that's called wheeling. So what happens is when you have, so if you're powering any demand, so any kind of load, at any given point during the time of the day or time of the year, the demand may be higher. So let's say we're powering this house for argument's sake. In the morning, we're all making breakfast in the kitchen, and our demand is maybe 5 kilowatt, whatever it is.
Right.
But then during the day, everyone goes to school and goes to work, and the demand drops right off. Now it's whatever, half a kilowatt. It's just powering your fridge and a bunch of other stuff that you left on. Right. But then you come home at night, and everyone's home. They're using their geysers, and but the exact same thing that happens with this house can be, extrapolated on a macro scale for a city, for a province, for anything.
So everybody does the same things roughly at the
right,
same
but
time.
it makes a variation, so it makes a pattern. So what happens is any power plant, whether it's coal fire or nuclear or anything, they have to gear up to supply demand. But there can be a gap, and that gap can be short. It can be anything from hours up to a few minutes, but there are drop-offs. Now you can't have a turbine that's producing all this power, and that power goes nowhere.
Right.
So what they do is they disengage it, and it goes into a state called wheeling. So they're still turning the turbine, but it's just not producing power.
Okay, and for nuclear, do they do that too?
It's the exact same concept. Yeah.
So
in
they
fact,
put the rods in
nuclear,
to stop
nuclear, you don't switch off. So you can't really. One of the big problems with nuclear, in fact, this is the big problem that they have in Japan with Fukushima, is that once you've got your heat, once the production, once the chain reaction has started, there's no switch, man. You can't walk up to a nuclear plant and go, okay, off now. Right. It doesn't work like that.
Okay.
It's a savage beast. You're splitting an atom.
Right.
So anyway, the net result is they have exactly the same principle. It goes into a state of wheeling, they disengage the actual production. The power is still being put into the actual turbine, but they've disengaged the production.
Okay, so they don't stop the reactor, they don't put the rods down like they would do.
No. If they're going into a state of maintenance, then obviously they will cut the output. But at the end of the day, I want you to put it in perspective. And there is really no difference. The reason why nuclear is because it takes less to make that much more heat. You're using a more advanced, you're splitting an atom, which is what's releasing that massive amounts of energy inside of that atom. Okay. To basically flash boil water. I mean, that's what you're doing. You flash boiling water. It's like, woo.
Yes.
But in coal, it's not different, really.
Right.
But you've got to keep that temperature at some constant. You can't walk in there and spray it down with a hose to switch it off. Right. Yeah, you can taper it off, and slowly cool it down. But even if you were to shut them down today, like a coal fire, it would take weeks to actually cool down to a point that it's functional.
A coal fire.
A coal fire. Forget nuclear. I mean, nuclear, coal fire, petroleum. It's all the same thing. It's all the same principle.
Right.
It's operating on a heat basis, and the heat is what is evaporating steam, and that steam is driven into a turbine and turns the wheel, and that's what generates. And the thing that I always find the funniest about this whole thing is that you can understand the basic principle of coal. You heat something up, and you're using the steam to turn a wheel, and that's sort of sensible. But when you start splitting atoms.
Right.
I mean, it's like one of the most powerful reactions in the universe almost. I mean, It's immensely powerful. I mean, outside of fission, it's huge. Yeah. And you're using it to boil water. It's the concept is crazy. It's crazy. And when accidents happen, they happen. And I mean, if you think about it in our lifetime, we're already aware of 2 accidents. You've got Chernobyl, you've got Fukushima. There are countless other...
3 Mile Island?
Yeah, this guy, I didn't even know about that. But I mean, there's countless other incidents that happen. But coming back to a nuclear reactor, for argument's sake, they all have a byproduct. So they flush out, there's a huge outflow of hot water. Now, because most of that comes from the sea and they don't really care, they just dump it into the sea. It goes back into the ocean. Right. That's why the water is always generally warmer around nuclear reactors. Right. But of course, it has a dramatic impact on all the entire marine ecosystem that's around a nuclear plant. I mean, it is devastating. Okay. So everything changes, everything shifts, and so that's another byproduct that you have from nuclear. I mean, it's not as bad, obviously, as nuclear waste, but it's right up there. It has a traumatic impact.
Now, you've been very involved in the new storage technologies that are coming on stream. How will that affect this concept of wheeling and disengaging from
Right,
baseload?
so I mean, it's like beautiful. It's really beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. There's actually a couple of ways to conquer what we call a base load problem. The base load problem is you have solar power and it's up in the day, but at night there's no solar power. So what happens? And that's the base load problem. And the same with the wind turbine. You've got all these wind turbines all around the country producing wind power, but there are times when there's no wind. So what happens?
Even in Cape Town,
right?
Quite rare.
Well, very rare. Yeah. at heights, yeah. But anyway, it's a problem. Okay, so there's a couple of technologies that stepped into the gap. One of these technologies is renewables called CSP, or concentrated solar power, and they use a type of salt, and they go through what's called a phase change, and they store the output. So they have all these mirrors, concentrate on another name for it is a power tower, but they concentrate on a point of light, and it melts the salt, and it basically stores the heat. And they can utilize that heat for overnight or days at a time. But the principle of storing energy as heat is there.
Right.
And of course, it's well over-engineered. I mean, seriously over-engineered. You can buy this stuff. It's Israeli technology. The storage technology is Israeli. The Israelis are very good at this kind of stuff.
Okay.
But so if you understand that here we've got these really advanced concepts that people that are trying to confuse you, they throw at you.
Okay.
Like they'll talk about things like, how do you store 50 megawatt? What is the base load? And they'll throw concepts at you
That's why we need you, Jason.
No. But I mean, it's not just me. It's not just me.
Yes.
As complex as they try to make it sound, it actually comes down to a very basic mechanic.
Right.
Like you heating up something, and then you're putting water through the thing, and the water boils, and then you understand?
It's a turbine.
And it runs a turbine. It's the exact
mechanical energy.
Exactly right, and the same principle. And another thing that I also love, I must just say this, is that in most of us, when I was growing up, we did an experiment where we took magnets and we put it around a piece of copper, and you make a little bulb go on. And it's kind of ironic that we're using the exact same thing. I mean, those big nuclear turbines, those big coal fire, those advanced, those heavy engineers, and it's serious stuff, mainly because of the output of it.
Sure.
But I mean, it is that same basic principle. It's that basic thing of magnet round copper. That's what it is.
Right,
and more advanced versions, but I mean, that's what it is. So anyway, there you get heat as a storage mechanism.
Okay.
And that's nice because they can utilize that. But there are actually cheaper ways to do it. They've come up with the mixture. What they've got is there's various different salts that they can apply to that. But you could actually do something simple.
Right.
You could do like sand. You could do like concrete.
Right.
Concrete actually has a higher storage the amount of heat that it can take, the amount of heat that it can retain it actually can retain it as long without having to undergo a phase change as the salt.
Right.
I mean, but we've so over-engineered the whole concept of it.
Concrete's not so romantic.
No. Like if you said to someone, hey, no, we're going to make a big hole here, and we're going to fill it with concrete, and then we're going to output, and we're going to heat up the concrete so it's really hot, and then that's our storage mechanism. I mean, no, you can't. You're not going to get a BMW like that, because anybody can do it. So that's on the one thing, and obviously I'm oversimplifying to an extent, but then you get super advances in technology, and this is what's just happened recently, is supercapacitors. And supercapacitor is like a beautiful thing inside of every kind of device. There's a thing called a capacitor, and the capacitor stores energy for a short period of time.
In our laptops, in our phones.
Laptops, in most devices, so anything that you've got any retained current. So like when you have to, most people have had this advice before.
Right.
So when they're having a problem with an electronic device, they say unplug it,
yes,
and then leave it off for like 10 seconds.
And everybody wonders why.
Why? Why must I do this?
Why can't we just put it on after 1 second? Because we're impatient people.
And it's just allowing the internal circuitry and the capacitors to discharge.
Capacitors, that's
right. And so it comes in various different forms, and mainly used in inverters and that kind of stuff. Anyway, they're a useful thing. And for a long time, it's been rumored that the ability, the disadvantage that you always had with capacitors was you could never keep the current that you put in it.
Right.
And of course the volume of storage that was available on any capacitor.
So capacitors discharge the current very quickly.
Yeah,
Within
so
10
they
seconds.
take current really quickly,
Yeah.
and they discharge current really
Which
quickly.
is the characteristics of a
That's
capacitor
what it
as
does.
far as we knew so far. And that's what capacitors did, and that's how engineers used them. But something's changed now, right?
Yes, right. So now they basically went and they did carbon nanotube technology, and they applied it to these supercapacitors. And basically what they've been able to do is they've been able to take a capacitor and they've been able to increase, first of all, the volume and amount of energy that it could take. Now a capacitor, various different sizes of capacitor, could always take a lot of energy, but they were never able to keep it for a long time. So now you can keep the energy on a supercapacitor from anything between 1 kilowatt hour, 50 megawatt, you're able to keep for up to 14 days.
Right.
And that's seriously
14 days
14
instead of
days.
10 seconds.
Instead of
Big
well,
difference.
even less than 10 seconds in some cases, but yes. So all of a sudden now you have a device that people would have loved to, for many years, everybody wanted to use a supercapacitor
Right.
for some storage.
Right.
But the ability to, it just was too fast, it was too transient. You couldn't make it stay, you know, no matter what you did. You couldn't keep the power there long enough.
So a capacitor now is more like what we would previously call a battery.
Yes, right.
Right.
So that's what we call them now. We call them supercapacitor batteries.
Right. But batteries have, the traditional batteries have disadvantages that capacitors don't have.
Of course, yes.
What are they?
So with any battery, you have a thing called an electrolyte. Electrolyte is like the medium, the gel, or the lead acid that they use.
Lithium?
Well, lithium as well, although lithium is slightly in a different class to your typical store types of energy. But the negative components that are associated with this is that there's generally a build-up. So on the plate, so in the terms of when you recharge and discharge, and over time, the battery it ceases to be able to absorb charge as well, and
Right.
it ceases to be able to give up charge as well.
Can you clean them? Can you improve them?
You can, in some cases, you can, but if you understand that, you can get a maximum lifespan out of, any kind of plate. The buildup is so intense. I mean, it punctures little holes in it. It's finished after a period of time.
As we know from our cell phones and our laptop computers.
Well, in that case, that's a lithium. So in that case, I mean, generally there's swelling on it, and the efficiency, so the overall ability for it to store power and release power, that becomes compromised over time.
Right.
The benefit that people have of lithium, for argument's sake, is that its energy density is is much higher. So
Compared to, say, a car battery.
Yeah, much more.
Much more.
But also it has the benefit that you're able to cycle it a lot deeper. So you're able to use more of a lithium battery than you are, for argument's sake.
Cycle it deeper? What is
Cycle. So every battery is rated on the number of cycles.
Recharge.
Right,
That's a cycle.
so it's a full discharge normally.
Right.
And you rate a battery, every battery has a thing called a DOD, which is a depth of depletion,
Right.
versus cycle life characteristics.
Right.
And this is how we assess generally a battery.
Right.
And so you will see it will have, if you've got a 100 amp battery, for argument's sake, and you use 50%, that's called a 50% DOD. Depth
Right.
of depletion means you're using half of the battery. And if you cycle that on a daily basis, it will tell you how many cycles, how many cycles you can get off that. Maybe you can get 1,000 cycles, maybe you can get 500 cycles.
Right.
But a cycle is, generally you can use it in a year or whatever. You'll use up a little lead acid battery or 2 years.
Well, like a car battery.
Or like car battery. So a car battery, because you're not using the full volume of a car batteries last longer. But under renewable energy applications, you're using that battery generally on a day-to-day basis. So
you fully deplete it?
Well, not fully, never fully, but down to half or 30%.
Okay.
And then you're putting it back up, and half and 30%. You could fully deplete it, but then, so the more you deplete it, the shorter the lifespan of the battery.
Okay.
So people generally try what we call shallow cycle. You impact as low on the battery as possible.
Okay.
To get the maximum possible lifespan of the battery. And this is true of all technologies, whether it's lead acid, whether it's gel, AGM, lithium, it makes no difference.
Right.
That applies to those concepts, because obviously there's a mechanical process that's taking, a chemical process, it's taking place inside of the battery.
Right.
That is, it is decreasing its lifespan based on the way that you're using.
So the number of cycles, I mean, very, very roughly off the top of your head, for a kind of car battery or a lithium-ion battery would be...
So on a car battery, you'll do anything between one... Well, a car battery is different, so forget car battery. A car battery is like a cranking battery. It's designed to give up power fast and take charge fast. But in any renewable or energy electrical storage, you use what's called a deep cycle battery.
Right.
So a deep cycle battery is designed that it can be recharged and discharged more.
Right, because with a car battery, it's quick, and then you use it, and you don't really use it after that.
Yeah, and it's got to yield up a lot. It's got to give up a lot of power very fast.
Right. With a laptop battery or a cell phone battery,
right, so
you're using it all the time. You're not
that's
just
right.
using it for a
and so
minute.
it's over a period. So your impact on it is less.
Right. Okay.
So, but at the same time, normally what you'll get is you'll get about 1 to 3 years off your cheap lead acid batteries.
1 to 2, and how many cycles is that?
Well, you know, it's using it every day.
Okay.
So if you take a 100 amp deep cycle battery, you use your 50% 50 amps per day, recharge it 50 amps per day.
Right.
You know, you will get roughly about a year to a year and a half. Max push, you'll get about 2.5 years off.
Right.
That's what happens.
And a laptop battery.
Well, a laptop battery is a lithium cell, so you'll get a lot more out of a laptop battery. A laptop battery, your cell phone battery, you'll get a lot more out of them. If you charge them properly and take care of them properly, those batteries can last you anything up to 12 years. Lithium is like that. Lithium is a good technology like that.
Okay.
And then you get more advanced lead acid technology, which will last you between 2.5 to say 5 years or 4 years. And these are all your kind of, your American class Trojan batteries, good, well designed. They're specifically focused for like renewable energy applications, and they're good batteries.
Okay. So now we come to capacitors.
Right.
How did they compare with?
Right. So I did a really cool calculation. Anyway, so this guy, I had this comment on our Facebook site, and the guy was saying, okay, and so I'm trying to compare, the differences. So I said, well, that's no problem, man. He says, yeah, it's not viable to go solar because you've got to change batteries. So, and the batteries, even the best batteries, only going to last you 12 years.
Okay.
And now, first of all, you got the concept wrong. I'm not trying to supply a battery system for the national grid.
Right.
I'm trying to supply a massive grid feed system, and generally there is no storage. Generally you're just supplying the grid. But I said, but even if there was to be a battery, and we were to do it, and we used a supercapacitor as a battery, our battery would last 1,395 years.
Oh, really? That's quite a long time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, God no. I mean, it's
that
crazy.
takes us back to about Anglo-Saxon times. That was before the Norman Conquest.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, and it just puts you in perspective in terms. Now look, the characteristics of usage of a supercapacitor are obviously different to a battery, but it gets you 500,000 cycles.
500,000. So like your cell phone, it's cycling every day, right? Your laptop probably every day.
Right.
So that's 500,000.
Right. So on a lead acid battery,
days.
For argument's sake, you get maybe 1,500 cycles.
Right.
So that's cycle in, or maybe 1,000 cycles. I'll call it. Okay, your best one. Okay, 1,000 cycles. So that's roughly 3 years.
Right.
That you got on that battery.
Okay. So it just doesn't have the same kind of because it's not chemical.
It's not chemicals, and it's got no internal resistance.
Okay.
Because there is no chemical. It's not trying to. It just takes everything you've got to give it. Its ability to charge is it's every, like in a normal battery system. You first got to heat up. You've got to warm up the battery, and it takes a while. It goes through various states of charge before it actually starts to absorb charge, before it gets to the bulk stage of charge.
Right.
And
this is with what?
This is normal, traditional kind of battery or storage.
Lithium ion.
Lithium ion, very similar. I mean, lithium ion takes power faster, but it's still the same principle.
Right.
It's a different kind of charging algorithm, but it's still a charge. And it takes time to charge.
And there's something changing chemically in these batteries.
Yeah, of course there is.
But with a charge or not?
Chemical alteration.
With a capacitor or not?
But with a capacitor, zero. So there's zero internal resistance. So that means that the same amount of time, so if you use 10 kilowatt and you put 10 kilowatt onto it, it will absorb that instantaneously, almost practically. So your charge time is like basically disappeared.
Right.
You know, it's like ludicrous.
And these things are commercially available now?
Commercially available, yes.
And the cost of these compared to traditional batteries?
So they're slightly more expensive, about 35% more expensive.
Which for 500,000 charges is not that
right, so I said
charge.
I said to a lot of the engineers, like some people that we spoke to, I said to a lot of them, I said, listen man, you know, it will outlast us.
Yeah.
You'll put in a battery in an application, we won't be around to see the end of that battery. You know, like, and that is just the reality of it. But the real excitement of this, look, it's an emerging, brand new technology. One company so far in the world has cracked this technology. And this technology is now available here in South Africa.
And as you've seen it work?
It functions. It functions in Dubai.
You personally?
No, I've obviously not. It's a new technology.
Okay, it's coming now.
Right, but anyway, all over the world there are functioning sites where people fly out to, they see it, fall over and cry about why they never thought of it. And, honestly, I'm telling you. But the functional reality of it is this.
Right.
Is that we don't yet really understand, like I don't really yet understand how to apply it yet to a renewable system.
Okay.
But if you think about the implications of what it does, forgetting renewable energy just for a moment, and you take a look at a coal-fired power station,
right,
a nuclear power station, and you start storing your energy on a massive capacity.
Now you mentioned earlier there's not much storage at the moment. People just produce for the grid, and when it's too much, they actually disengage the plates.
Correct.
So it's not. So it's a huge waste.
It's a huge waste.
So there's all that energy. There's all that
But
heat.
also remember, a lot
that's
of the,
not being converted into.
A lot of the load shedding that we experienced last year was due to them shutting down plants for maintenance.
Right.
So the actual grid took impact. They overstretched when they shut down plants because maintenance had to be performed. People got shut down all over the country.
Okay.
Now you place a supercapacitor into that mix, and all of a sudden you can store up to 14 days on your system. You can shut down your plant, go have a beer, play a game of golf, come back, and it's the best part is you can put the power back into that. So when it does come back on, it will instantaneously pick up your output again. It will charge itself in minutes.
Right.
It's ludicrous.
So in other words, we can take these plants which are producing and then being disengaged and run them 100% of the time, or
Yes.
something like that, and store all the power, and then
Right.
we won't need to build all these extra power stations.
Right. Or you could just use it to take care of your peaks. So where you are now basically peaking out and then dropping down, you've got an average that is in operation. So if you could have a capacitor that just took care of your peaks, it means that your turbines would only ever have to stay at the average. They wouldn't need to climb up for the peak because your capacitor could take care of all the peaks.
Right.
So all of the hills and anything that might come in between, any sporadic kind of
So with our existing old style coal-fired fossil fuel thing, we can use them far more efficiently.
Far more efficient.
So we don't need to produce any more. China's producing one a week or something.
Yeah, I heard that. I've actually heard that before, but I'd like to see the write-up on that.
Okay, I've never researched.
The only reason is because it takes between 5 to 10 years to produce.
Yeah.
China has recently, they've just put. First of all, China has more wind power than all of Europe and United States put together.
Wow.
I mean, it's immense, man. In terms of solar PV, they're talking about knocking out, I think, close on 15% of their grid, completely. 15, but understand this is China. We're not talking about little South Africa. I mean,
it's not a small grid.
2% of their grid is like our entire power consumption, kind of thing. Those aren't real figures, but But anyway, so just to kind of focus on the thing. Now, if you take a look at nuclear power, coal fire, any of those kind of power technologies, they're generally rather inefficient, and the basis for keeping them was operating on the principle that there wasn't another technology that could supply a base load, a persistent power. When you walk to your wall, you turn on a switch, it must work. Big industry, when they're operating, they can't say, oh shit, the sun's gone down, we no longer, we got to switch off.
Right.
And they traded on this for a long period of time, and this is how they function. But if you take a renewable energy system be it photovoltaic, wind, wave, whatever you want.
Right.
And you apply it to a couple of 50 megawatt capacitors. All of a sudden, you are able to take all the power that they output. If in one part of the country there's no wind, in another part there's sun, you know, and you're able to store all this and deploy it back to grid. You've got parity in terms of being able to make a stable baseload, a stable grid.
Right.
And so the proposition, the opportunity for renewable energy to completely supplant kind of fossil fuel driven kind of energy sources, it's here, it's really here.
Because the storage solves the baseload problem.
The storage solves the baseload problem. But even if supercapacitors never existed,
okay,
even if they weren't around, you with sufficient focus on any concept, bearing in mind that the principle here is to heat something. That's it, man. I mean, it's just to heat something up.
You
want to heat something up. So if you completely got rid of the concept of a supercapacitor, and let's say in every province you dug a massive hole, just as an argument, you fill that massive hole with cement, and you know, you had a water source exactly like a coal-fired plant does, and you attach that to turbines, and that just sat there, and all the output that you created from any wind source or any solar source or anything, it just plummeted into this massive heat store.
Right.
So every time the grid couldn't take it, the plants were producing, say in this case 100 megawatt, but the grid's only using 80 megawatt, then that extra 20 megawatt just shoveled into this heat store. And this happens all over.
Can you keep the heat hot by insulation?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, those are thermal characteristics. But I mean, you know, if you think about it, if you're able to do it with a salt, with a improved degree of efficiency, and overly complex, I mean, it goes through some, actually I said it goes through like a phase change. You know, they are playing with the basic kind of atomic structure of their storage medium, just to get a desired result.
And there's simpler ways to do it.
But if you think about it, I mean, take a look at something like a mountain, you know, so there we have a thing here, it's called a bergwind, and the bergwind comes because the mountains are heated, you know, like they get heated up during the day and the wind from the mountain brings the heat, and at night, you can be sitting outside at night and it's beautiful and warm. All you're talking about is heating something.
Right.
And so by the more concentration that you put on that object, the more heat that you develop in that object, it retains it to a certain degree, and you can improve the efficiency of that retention of heat. You can do this,
right?
And it's not. I mean, it's not. I mean, we came up with some crazy concepts. You know, keep a gap separating it and keep it like hovering on magnetic levitators. But the principle of everything remains the same. It is a basic mechanical truth of anything. If you heat something up, it has a time that it will retain that heat, and if you insulate it, that time will remain longer.
Right.
And if you run water through it and it's hot enough, water boils, and as long as you have enough pressure coming through it, enough heat inside of it, you can drive a steam turbine. And that's exactly what they're doing. And that
in every case.
In every case, it's a basic mechanical truth. And so when we come back to the concepts of why we do things so overly complex, they can actually be simple. They can be simple, but they're not.
Okay, the trees here, we collect the seeds in the rivers, mainly along the Berg River, where the Berg River is so polluted. And we start right up at source at Assegai-Bos, collecting seeds of the indigenous breeder crew of yellowwoods and all the other indigenous plants and bushes and grasses and things that filter the water. And we did 16,500 trees last year, over 14,500 this year. We've got another probably 7,000 still to plant this year as well, of all different types. That are indigenous ones. So once
Land of Agriculture gets in and moves all the aliens, and we go in afterwards and plant indigenous stuff behind them. Reforest, increase biodiversity, clean the water, get more habitats, so it increases all the species, not just the bar. Well, what's happening, the Berg River now is so polluted that the United Nations have threatened that they will ban all fruit irrigated from the Berg River below Paarl. That's how bad the pollution is, gets into the fruit. There we're looking at hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions of rands in exports, so it's a massive, massive problem. Provincial government is working very hard on it, Department of Agriculture is working very hard on it, but there's a time limit where the cut-off has to come. We have to fix the river. No, the farmers are getting into this very much. Of course, there is still sprays, but it's far better controlled. They're doing a lot of aerial spray now, but the helicopters or the planes all work on GPS points now, so there's very little sort of wafting of the spray. It's very specific how they spray it now. It's actually quite professional. And some of the insecticides they're using now are much, much better than they were 5 years ago. Most of the spraying is against fruit fly. Not that we know of, no. No. Not on that sort of scale. It's come a lot better. When we came here 30 years ago, it was much, much worse. There was no helmets on the tractors. Nowadays the tractors are closed, they've got filters on them, the guys have masks, and of course the chemicals are far more better and not as harmful as they were 30 years ago. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's got much more specific now aerial spraying, in that you don't get that wind waft. They spray, we hear them here, they sunrise, normally when there's no wind around, and they're very, very specific. You can watch the sprays only on that orchard. Drifting used to be a major problem before, but it's much better controlled. It's still a little bit, it's not, yeah, but here it's quite specific. But not everybody can afford to have that kind of equipment. Today, arriving this afternoon, is 27 people from Cape Town University that are here to study the water. They're going to open a research station in the old sewage works down the road. Quite a fantastic project that. That was Professor Kevin Winter. The facility being an old sewage works and right on the tributaries to the Berg is an absolute perfect research station. That particular department at Cape Town University has been working on this river for years now, so they've got a long track record of how the pollution has increased. A lot of it it's not just spray. The effects of spray are getting better and better. I mean, it obviously still is an effect, but the biggest problem now is we've got very good road engineers who make fantastic stormwater drains, and a lot of the sewage works or sewage pipes in the squatter camps are broken, so all the effluent goes straight into the stormwater drains and straight to the river. It just bypasses the sewage works completely. So that's the biggest pollution problem is coming out of settlements. There's various initiatives going on by Western Cape government, some quite brilliant ones, using biomimicry and that sort of thing. And that's working. It's an experiment now, but it seems to be working. We can go up there and have a look if you want. Well, we don't spray here at all. So we stopped farming here about 10 years ago because of the sprays we had to use. So it's been totally organic now for over 10 years. The only thing we spray here is garlic and chilies. So, well, there's enough here for everybody.
Exactly.
There's enough here for the caterpillars. The chickens eat the caterpillars. So it's, there's plenty for everybody here. Very possible.
It's possible.
It's very possible, yeah. It's proving in a lot of areas. Department of Agriculture are doing quite a initiative with the wheat farmers, where they're not burning and spraying so much, they're leaving all the biomass in the ground and their crops are increasing with far less expense. So it's definitely possible. There are ways. There is a major problem with bees in South Africa at the moment. We've lost over 40% of that, but that's due to a fungus hitting the larva of the bee in the hives, so the actual larva does not mature. No, not with the 18 hives we've got here and the fact that we're organic. We get more pollination than we can actually use. Yeah, we're growing things all the year around here, so it's not a problem. Yeah, we actually plant for the bees. We deliberately plant in winter stuff that the bees can eat, so we make sure they've got food all around.
Okay.
We've had quite a long discussions with the road department, trying to get them to stop cutting the road verges, and they've sort of come back with various answers to us. So what we now have to do is, even if they cut it 400 mil off the ground, that'll still give the fakies and all the other things for the bees to eat. But if you add up the millions of hectares of road verges that could become bee fodder, I think that's one of the answers we must look at is, stop cutting the road verges. There's enough fodder there to keep the bees busy, plenty of them. Yeah, that is a thing, and also We've discussed that a lot with the Department of Agriculture, the way they take the aliens out of the riverbeds. They just flatten everything. I'll show you down here how we do it. We plant the indigenous and we just do this with the aliens. So we use the alien plants as the pioneer plants, plant all the indigenous stuff, and then as the indigenous stuff grows we take out the aliens. Some of the other methods, they go and they flatten everything, they bring in DEET in bulldozers, which weigh tons. I don't know what the effects of that's on the biomass and everything living in the soil, but it must be radical. So we're doing it a different way to a lot of the sort of, but it's a cost factor. You know, to go in and clear things like on the Berg River, it definitely is the most cost effective. So rather than doing something and we get in afterwards and plant the indigenous trees than do absolutely nothing. But the whole idea, the way we do it, is that it gives the bees and all the insects time to adapt from gum to the natural stuff. You know, if you take out the gum completely, a lot of the bees have adapted only to gum, or eucalyptus or various other indigenous trees. So it's a matter of how one does it. No, the whole idea of getting the indigenous plants is to stop the erosion, because a lot of the gums and pines and things, they suck up a huge amount of water, and their root system is not as good for anti-erosion as a lot of the indigenous stuff. They're indigenous, so what we do, we literally find the very few trees that are still here, indigenous trees, and we go at the right time of year, depending on the species, collect the seeds and then replant them back in the same area where we picked them up. Because they have, a lot of these rivers have been devastated, so sometimes it's very difficult for us to find trees in certain areas, but we do find them now and then, and from one tree we can get 3,000-4,000 seedlings off it. So. No, we picked them in the wild. You picked them in the wild? Yeah, we actually got permission from Cape Nature.
What about...
We do, but we only use heirloom seed. No, not really. We order them over internet, or we've got various contacts in Cape Town and around the country where we get them from, friends, people like that. We grow a lot of our own heirloom seeds here now. No, I think let's go around, and I'm certainly not an expert in everything, but I can show you around.
Communicating, and what I love is the fact that you're taking the seeds from the situs, from the same area, and you're putting them back. So it's like bringing them back into the family. And trees talk, don't they?
I'm convinced trees communicate. They definitely do. I mean, there's no question. If giraffes are eating acacia there, all the acacia trees around start putting out a bitterness to stop the giraffe eating them. Yeah. So you see the giraffe eat here, and then he goes right over there to eat, because these ones have already put out a bit of flavour into their leaves. So there's a communication. How it works, I don't know. But I don't know how cell phones talk to each other. So, you know, there's a lot of communications out there we don't know, but I'm 100% convinced trees communicate.
We're going to see that today if we can.
Yeah, I've tied up today because all the universities come.
You're not in agreement about the spraying, you're just saying that it has improved.
Yeah, no, I've got an agreement.
But
no, one of the worst sprays that we used to experience, but I haven't seen it much lately, is a thing called winter oil. And basically what they did, it was sprayed on the trees as they started to bud, and it arrested, literally suffocated everything. So the buds that were starting were suffocated. So the other buds internally could get up to the same sort of level of budding, and it had a certain sort of lifespan, and then when it left they would all bud together. So it saved the farmers a lot of money, because they could then pick once or twice instead of 3 or 4 times as it budded naturally. So it was done for that, but that killed everything. I mean, insects, everything. It was terrible stuff. But as I say, I haven't seen it used for a while. Not in this area anyway.
Thank you.
At least in the last 15 years, all the chemicals, including herbicides, have an adjuvant, which is designed to make the chemicals stick to whatever. They stick to everything. So people everywhere has, instead of before where it would disperse, it now sticks. And so I think that's why everybody's getting more sick these days than before. And I've heard that they use aluminium. So the air is full of aluminium, and already our water supply has alum in it, so there's just an oversupply of aluminium. Growing problem. Yeah. So that's why people have chest problems and dermatitis, and because it's just sticking to everything. And our water supply in Stellenbosch always smells and tastes like whatever is being sprayed at. Could be like in the winter it smells like herbicide, in the summer it smells and tastes like insecticide. So whatever's being sprayed is getting in the water somehow or other.
For trees that grow naturally in the rivers and that we propagate from seed and put back in the rivers. In these beds here we've got 46,000 seedlings which are going to go into about 32 schools within Biosphere Reserve, and the rest get planted into settlements and various other private homes for food security. All of these trays are filled with vegetables.
Wow, okay.
So
Amazing.
we go in every week. We've got a team going into various communities, distributing seedlings, setting up the gardens, teaching people how to make compost, that sort of thing. All vegetables, yeah. These are just flowers for somebody wanting to plant them, one of the volunteers. And then once they get to a certain size, we then prick them out, put them into, yeah, here's a lot of these, you'll see that must be 6 or 8 in one plug. These are 220 plug trays. So all this gets planted out, given away, we don't sell anything. Those have come up in the last 24 hours. You must know these.
No?
And keyhole gardens with a compost heap in the middle.
Oh, I love it. Explain it.
Well, basically what it is, it's a raised bed, so we put sticks and cardboard and anything underneath. Here's a compost heap in the middle, so you don't have to fertilize it, it just leaches out from the compost. Yeah. And we've put a lot of these into, well, old age homes, informal settlements, things like that. They work for two reasons. People that can't bend down, it's easy for them to garden. It's self-generating. And in a lot of the areas they've got pigs, so they can't have gardens. This is fantastic. You put them in, and it's all made from alien timber. It's taken out where the aliens have been cleared out of the rivers, and you can easily feed a family off this. I mean, this has now just been revamped, but we had them where we put the overhead gardens. You pick pumpkins here, and hold back there was tomatoes and climbing plants and beans. But when we finish the centre at Stellenbosch, there'll be a whole example of all of this. So we bus the communities in and take them there for a whole day, and they learn, and everything's done with recycled materials, so it costs nothing.
Oh.
You know.
So these are some of the alien...
Yeah, just alien things.
Taken
Often,
out
yeah, municipalities always chopping down things, so everything we use is, we make it in such a way that anybody can do it, no matter what their financial incomes are.
Cost of
all of the stuff
vegetables
here we
and
give away.
seedlings is really expensive. So if they couldn't, how would they get a supply of that?
Just finance. All of this stuff here, we've got people, volunteers, just planting all the time. So we've normally got between 30 and 40,000 seedlings in stock. It's done through volunteers and things like that, and we propagate a lot of our own seeds, so it doesn't cost us much. Everything's reused, yeah.
And where do the volunteers come from? The local community?
Local communities. Beauty of having Jan Marais, it's right in the middle of the university, so we've got about 150 students signed up as volunteers, and then we get volunteers from Luxembourg. They come here for 6 months at a time, and normally we've got at least 2 or 3 of them, and then we get interns and woofers, and so it's all done on a shoestring.
Sculptures?
Yeah, that's just a friend of mine. You know, they do the molds, and then of course they make the bronze things. So I just take the original one. Yeah, the only pesticide we use here, we grow the chilies and we grow the garlic. There's the chilies you can see there. Here's the wild garlic, things like that. We put that in a liquidizer. We then filter it and put it into a back spray, and we spray that. That's the only thing we spray here. We do, I mean, you'll see some of them eating it. Chickens are the worst. They come and eat the bugs and eat everything else as well. We just plant enough for everybody. So we've always got a supply. All our staff virtually feed off this garden as well. And the bugs also eat it. So we're really not worried if there's two. But it'll just reduce the Oh yeah, we see it especially in the ECD schools, which we supply from this garden as well. Those kids are definitely, you could see a change after 5 or 6 months. They were definitely healthier, there's no question of that. Because they were literally living on rice on Monday, pasta on Tuesday, samp. They got no minerals or vitamins in their diet or meat at all. So if we deliver, in summer when it's really flourishing here, we deliver between 80 and 120 kilos a week. So that's definitely adds to their diet. Oh, I've never really measured it out, but it's quite, I'll show you up, it goes right up past the red bus there. Yeah, probably a bit more. Okay. Probably a bit more, because we literally, between the pear trees, that's where we plant. So every piece of ground is used. We haven't taken the pear trees out to make a vegetable garden. They're planted 4 meters apart, so we've got 3 meter vegetable gardens right up through the pear orchard. Everything grows together.
Yes, and that's just what it should be. Just utilizing the land, utilizing what is around, and what I love is his principle of sharing and giving of his knowledge and giving of the seeds and passing them on. I think that's just extraordinary, and he's a man of the times. You know?
Yeah, the other thing we're researching now is a centrifugal toilet which was developed in Sweden. It's been around for quite a few years, and they use them on all the road stops going through Sweden, and they've about 4 or 5 times more people using them than they expected, and they're still working fine. At the Eden project, they've got one that handles 72,000 people a year, and it's very simple. It looks like an hourglass, and you use a normal flushing toilet, because a lot of people in this country don't want dry toilets, they want what everybody else has got. And so basically the flush toilet, all the effluent goes into this thing, and just through its shape and the spin, it separates the solids from the liquids. So the liquids will go into our tree nurseries, and the solids go into a thing below with worms, and it turns into fertilizer. So no sewage leaves that property at all. So one of the projects we're working on now is to go into informal settlements and split them into areas, because at the moment to put these sort of things in, these need no maintenance at all, they've got no moving parts. But we're trying to split the areas into, say, 100 houses, put them through one of these systems, put a nursery and a recycling unit in between those 100 houses, and that will then go to produce. We'll put a nursery there too, and then we will then buy the trees back from the community and replant them in the rivers. So it's win-win both ways. The banana circle, what a banana circle is, it really is just a round pit. You dig a pit. We've got this one line because we're experimenting with not just with grey water but with human waste as well. So we dug this pit about 2 meters wide, 1.5 meters deep, and we lined it so it is waterproof, so nothing can get into the soil because we're quite close to the river. We then piped that into a Jojo tank, but there's about 8 people using this toilet every day, and nothing ever has gone into the Jojo tank. So what we did, we put about 1 kilo of worms in it first, and then we covered it with soil, and when we planted things like Phragmites, reeds, bananas and things like that, so that sucks up all the liquids, and the worms eat all the solids. And we've had that down now for about 1.5 years, and it's working perfectly. Now that's why it's lined. And the University of Cape Town is keeping a beady eye, and they're quite interested to see how it works. So it's very nice to have a university watching it, and if it does, if we can prove the concept and scientifically prove it, then we'll see how we can roll it out in other areas. Not just one, because through the biosphere reserves, we're in 121 countries, about 760 biospheres worldwide, and we've now got 8 in South Africa. So we've got very, very strong connections with tertiary institutions and a whole lot of other specialized institutions worldwide. So when we do experiments, we've really got the backing, and anything new we try, obviously we need to test for 2, 3, 4 years, depending on what the projects are. And we obviously need a university or some specialized institution to verify what we're doing technically, to get the technical papers out there. So it's not just a bunch of tree huggers trying to do something, it's technically proven. So, and then we can convince, say, municipalities that this is not a dangerous thing and there's no leakage into the rivers, that type of thing. But without having that relationship with universities, it's just talk. We've had a lot of discussions, and we work very closely with municipalities, and they definitely do care. It's just that the processes take so long. I mean, you take our sewage works in Franschhoek. The one that was designed now was probably designed 12 years ago, It takes a whole lot of time to get the funding, and then to get the tenders out to build it, and in that 10 or 12 years to get that process through, certain communities have bludgeoned. No, we've got a new one here, but if you take that time, it's already undercapacitated. You know, so it's not that they don't care. In fact, there are some very good people working in the municipalities that are very caring, but it's the red tape and the whole process that they've got to go through to get things implemented in time. And you get a town like Franschhoek, it's designed for Franschhoek residents, for the size of the town, with probably a 20-year expansion plan behind it. And then we get festivals like Bastille Festival, bring in another 60,000 people, and it just can't cope, so it goes straight over the top into the rivers. So it's all this sort of planning that happens, and bludgeoning communities which were never planned for. Houses or properties that are supposed to have 4 people on have now got 20 on. So sewage is the biggest problem, there's no question of it. No, it works well.
And there's some ones coming into the reeds bed here. Is that what?
No, not from our houses, so those go through different systems, no, but not into this dam. Yeah, come here at night, you can hardly talk. That these farmers are making a living, it's their living, it's their business. And if a spray is legal, it should have been tested by the authorities. You know, our eyes were tested by universities, and I think where the fault lies, if it's damaging, it should be made illegal. So there's something wrong with the legislation, not necessarily the farmers themselves. So that's where the trouble should lie. But you've got very powerful companies like Monsanto and these things. I mean, they're always in court for something. So, yeah, this thatch is just coming. Came with that house thatch. That's from old straw, and it's mixed with cow manure. They run around all day. No, they choose where they want to lay. On our bed, even in the chair in the office, there's one every day. And in the top of the bus, the other one's laying. So they lay where they want. There's a chair in the office where the dog's allowed to sit. And when the chicken wants to lay on the chair, it chases the dog off, lays the egg, and then the dog can come back.
And does the dog lie on the egg then?
No, if it gets there, he'll eat it before we get to it, so we got to watch it.
Yesterday I released a document that was in relation to there was a news article came out that the minister was basically trying to play down the costs of solar power. They said that the solar power plants were costing them between 50 and 62 billion over the course of his 20-year contract. And as a result it was too expensive, and therefore South Africa was using it to justify the need to move over to nuclear. And there's a whole lot of back-end politics that goes in with that. Anybody that's in the renewable energy industry knows that it's an absolute load of rubbish, because a solar plant, and in this case they're referring to a 100 megawatt solar plant, for us to build a 100 megawatt solar plant costs us roughly 2 billion rand, and therefore it makes no sense as to why you would enter into a contract for 60 billion when the actual cost of the plant is 2 billion, and it makes its power from the sun exactly the same way that these people are going to be doing it. So why wouldn't local municipalities, Eskom, etc., whoever, why wouldn't they just build their own plant and pay some people for maintenance, and that's it? And then it wouldn't cost them 60 billion rand, because ultimately renewable, what I proved inside that letter, is a far cheaper form of power. And then in addition to it, I brought into the environmental benefits in terms of the amount of charcoal that is used by coal fire, the amount of water that is used by coal fire, 1.32 litres of water per kilowatt hour of energy. 1 litres, ludicrous. 1 kilogram of coal burned for 1 kilowatt of energy, 1 kilowatt hour of energy. I mean, it's absolute madness. So then I went on to nuclear, and I just explained the whole process of uranium and the cost, the CO2 costs that are associated with it. And I summarized basically by offering to show them supporting documentation that proves how much a solar plant costs on a cost sale basis on that scale, which is 100 megawatts. And at the end of the day, we are being completely misled this has become a political tossing ground. What they're really trying to do is they have an intention, a small group of people have an intention to try and go with a beneficial kind of contract system where other people are making astronomical amounts of money that is costing us, the taxpayer, and also the consumer of that power. We are having to pay for this, and for no reason. And they're misleading us as to why they're doing that, and that's what that document was about.
My name is Nobile Ngosi from the Northwest University Climatology Research Group and South African Climate Change Coalition.
What does that do, that climate change group?
Our climate research group, we go around in the community and then we find problems that are related to climate change, like air quality. I'm specifically concerned about air quality, and then we take measurement, and when we measure how much emissions is emitted from domestic burning, so that we can know like how much content, and then we can try to present that in the form of a document, and then we report it to the government. So like we can tell them something is wrong. This amount of people are dying every year because of air pollution, so we need to do something about it.
Do you have any success with them doing anything about it?
Yes, there's been interventions in the low-income settlement in Kwadela, the township in Mpumalanga, whereby there's like thermal insulations and then changing of the stoves, and then teaching people about how to burn efficiently so that to reduce the emissions.
How to bake efficiently?
How to burn.
Burn efficiently?
Yes.
Do you feel that burning is still necessary?
People in low-income residential areas actually don't have much money to buy electricity. Even if they do have money, it runs out before the month ends, so they feel like coal is cheaper, and then so they burn coal instead of burning electricity.
But electricity at the moment is from coal anyway, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
But then the emissions now are occurring at a local level, but it affects them.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the problem.
Do you think it's important that the coal should affect anybody at all?
No. Actually, I think we should move from fossil or solid fuel burning and move to renewable or natural sources of energy like the sun. We need to move to hydropower and wind. So,
if you had some advice to give the government from the things that you've been seeing, what would you, if you were the number one person in the government and you could choose what you asked people to do, or what you got the country to do, what would you like to see if you had indefinite money?
Okay, I have two things. The first thing, I would actually like them to integrate education, like the curriculum education, with the environmental studies, so that they can actually, when the kids grow, they actually have a background of environmental issues and stuff, and then to inspire them and to spark that climate activist in them, so that they actually know when they do something there's an effect. Okay, secondly, I would actually like the government to actually do something about the emissions from low-income residential areas, because it's really bad. And yeah.
So typically, how much would you say of the people in townships are utilizing electricity?
There is access to electricity, but then with load shedding, and then the price of electricity going up every year, people actually can't afford it. According to Dr. Mluli, 80% of the population in low-income residential areas still use solid fuels, even with access to electricity, because they can't afford it. So the access doesn't change much. It changes, but it doesn't change much. So we actually need to remove the need to burn solid fuels.
That's a very good statement that you made there.
Yeah.
Can you just outline one more time, if you're, in order to stop the problem that your group are encountering now?
Yes.
It is a very serious problem. What sort of side effects, first of all, would you?
Oh my God, there's environmental side effects, and then there's health. That's like the the center of the problem. Like people, children, especially children and elders, they're actually vulnerable to air pollution related disease because they are the ones that, the women are the ones that cook, so they're always in the kitchen, so they're exposed to these emissions. The children are always in the kitchen ready to get dinner, so they're always exposed. And then their physiology, they actually breathe in much faster than adults, so they're actually very much vulnerable to air pollution related diseases. According to, is it David? Yes, like 2,000 children die every year in South Africa due to air pollution related diseases, so it's bad. And then the environmental issues, we have ambient air quality is poor, and then you're gonna have fog, and then there's like environmental issues, it's really bad.
What kind of diseases are caused by air pollution?
We have asthma, and then you have cardiovascular related diseases, and then you have the respiratory related, and then sinuses, and then they increase like the effect of maybe cancer, and it just goes extreme. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say? If you,
yes.
You're now talking to like potentially millions of people, what would you like to say to the rest of the world out there who are watching what everybody who can do something is doing on the ground? And what would you like to say to them that they can do to help you?
Okay, for me, like there's this quote that's like my daily quote by Dr. Martin Luther King that says that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So the the day we become silent about things that matter. Yes, so when you see something wrong, don't keep quiet. Speak it out, like say something or do something about it. Get your voice heard, something like that. So because my worst fear is sitting in the future with no trees and then no ocean, no animals, and then my kids ask me, "Mommy, what did you do about this? You saw this was happening and what did you do?" And not being able to answer that question, it's just gonna, I don't know, I feel like I need to do something, not for myself and for my kids too and my grandchildren. So actually, that's why I'm here. I'm doing something.
How old are you now?
Actually, I'm turning 23 next week. Yes.
Do you think that you are responsible for all the things that are happening at this moment?
For climate change? Okay, partly yes. I am, because the things that we do daily, like turning the water tap while you're brushing your teeth, that has an effect. And then you burning emissions using low-grade coal, that's an effect. So everyone like does something. Everyone is guilty. You can't say I'm not guilty. Everyone is guilty. But what we can do is to just identify the things that you do daily and try to minimize your effect from the things that you do every day. So yes, everyone is guilty.
If someone came to you and said, if we change the systems of the world completely to something that is in harmony with nature, would you be welcome that, or would you be resistant to changing your way of life that you have now?
Wow, actually I would love that. I would love, because the more people we have changing their lifestyle, the better and the faster the restoration of what we have done. So I actually would love that. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Emmanuel Chisalu from Zambia. I work for Supreme Audit Institution, Office of the Auditor General, as a performance and environmental auditor. Basically, my responsibility involves auditing the value for money in terms of how Zambia is managing its natural resources. Sure.
Have you got anything that you've noticed there that's of concern about your natural resources in Zambia?
Most definitely. With the trees, the natural forests that we have. Every year Zambia loses close to 250,000 to 300,000 hectares of land through deforestation. And that has affected us negatively in terms of rainfall generation, in terms of holding soil intactly to avoid soil erosion, and that is mainly contributing to climate change. So it is of concern, and that's the reason why I've packed my bags to get into the forest and ensure that we conduct the forest inventory, ensure that there is monitoring systems operating effectively and efficiently, so that there is sustainable protection of the natural resources that we have.
Can you tell me what is the reason why you deforest the land? What is the land being deforested to do?
All right, it's through population increase. I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, Zambia's population was half the population that we have today, which is 16 million people. Right. So the population has somewhat doubled, and also unsustainable practices of agriculture. There's a system that we call in Zambia Chitemene system, which involves clearing the bush by cutting down trees. You bend them in order for you to make the soil fertile. And also we've got other aspect of whereas people now, their disposable income has increased, and so they're establishing property. So land as well, in terms of land allocation, it has been a challenge. So people have decided to encroach into the forest so that they can start building and constructing their property within the natural forests.
Are they producing good crops from the land under the forest?
I would say yes, but the kind of crops that they're producing is just to sustain them at household level. Yeah.
Do you grow genetically modified grain in Zambia?
No, we don't. Yeah, it's natural maize that usually is being grown by the small-scale maize farmers, because the small-scale maize farmers are the they dominate the farming industry in Zambia. So they produce about 90% of the harvest that we usually record every year.
Are you having a drought at the moment in Zambia?
No, though it was predicted that we would have a drought due to El Nino in the previous farming season. But what we recorded was a bumper harvest, and what we have in terms of food reserve, it will be able to sustain us for the next 2 years.
What do you put down the fact that Zambia has managed to avoid the drought when the rest of Africa seems to be experiencing it?
Well, what I would say, it's God's grace, because scientists, meteorologists had predicted that we'll have a severe drought. But I was very happy that my president, the current president, His Excellency Edgar Chagwalugu, had called for a national day of prayer, whereas we prayed so that the will of God should prevail against what man is talking about, that we experience drought, there will be severe hunger, and so on and so forth. So definitely the prayers yielded a positive result, and instead of having drought, we had the bumper harvest. Yeah.
Can you tell me, do you use chemicals in your growing of maize, the way that you grow?
Yeah, at the moment, though, we're trying to move away, to shift from that paradigm of using chemicals, because now we understand that the use of chemicals on the soil, one, it disturbs, the biodiversity of small, living things under the soils. So what the agriculturalists are advocating for is use of natural fertilizers, manures. So there's what we call field day extension, where they go and teach small-scale farmers on how to use natural manures instead of using these chemical pesticides, in order for them to kill the weeds or kill the pests that are hovering around their crops.
Do you think this could have had some effect on your managing to go through the drought? Is that your system of agriculture is more suitable for a potential drought?
Yeah, definitely it is. Because there was one way, first of all, they predicted that we'll have this situation, so we were prepared to adapt. And so farmers were being advised to plant drought-resistant crops. So yeah, the drought-resistant crops survived at the midst of minimal rainfall, but later on the rainfall began to increase. So there was information which was given well in advance. Yeah.
What does your group do in where you work? What do they do what are they making happen in Zambia?
All right, a performance and environmental auditor do is to go and assess the state of natural resources or how the environment is being managed. For instance, I was conducting the audit which I just concluded, sustainable forest management. I was assessing the tools how the system is operating in order to protect the forest in a sustainable manner. So basically, we offer checks and balances. If we find out that there's something wrong, we collect those findings, then write to the National Assembly, the policymakers, and tell them that we have experienced or we have noticed such kind of weaknesses within the system of environmental management. And so we give them recommendations on how they can implement the best practices to protect the environment. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And the other kind of natural resources that are not forest, is there people working on that as well too, like your water and your soil?
Yes, definitely. Like this year, we're hoping that we're going to conduct a water audit. We want to see what measures has the government put in place to harvest natural waters which are coming from the rains, so that whenever we're faced with any crisis in terms of a drought, would have more stored within our reserve tanks. Because I'll give you one practical example. Zambia has been affected massively by load shedding due to reduced rainfall. So it has affected our economy in several ways, such that small medium enterprises business, they are limping because they usually receive let's say electricity 8 hours a day, and sometimes off production hours. So you can imagine how someone who depends on feeding his family through welding, metal fabrication, or a salon, and throughout the day they don't have electricity, how are they going to generate that money? So now we want to conduct this audit and advise the government that in case of this eventuality which results into, let's say, maybe load shedding, what other alternatives can we have in place apart from investing into other renewable energy? Can we have more water storages so that when the crisis comes, we are safe? Yeah.
Are you considering going into solar energy?
Yes, we are. Actually, that's a big project and one of the campaign messages which our president had and which saw him assume power again. So we want to move just from dependence on hydro and move on other clean sources of energy such as solar and also geothermal. Yes.
That's good.
Sure.
If you had any advice, if you're talking now to people all over the world,
Yeah.
Is there anything that they can do in their lives that will change things for Zambia?
Most definitely. My advice to the people around the world is, first things first. I know our desire to use the natural resources. I know our desire to work on the environment. But let us work on the environment without compromising the needs of the future generation. Alright. So what we need definitely is people to live the environment, to eat the environment, to love the environment. The environment should be part of their identity, such that I don't need to have a tag so that I can go and protect the environment. It's a responsibility of each and every person who's living in this world to protect the environment. If we don't, there will come a day and a time when such kind of beautiful green scenery will no longer exist, because environmental problems are man-induced, and the same environmental problems have got solution from us, the same people who are causing those problems. So let's take care of the environment. When you come to Zambia, don't cut a tree, plant a tree. Sure.
So my name is Megan Simons. I'm a master's student at the University of the Western Cape in the Biodiversity and Conservation Biology Project department. I also am an intern with the Agricultural Research Council. So just to give a little background on myself, my project, or my master's project, mainly focuses on the effects that unplanned wildfires has on the Nosterveld in the Kamiesberg uplands. This is a communal area in the Northern Cape. And the study focuses on the effects that fire also has on Lithropappus and Nocirotis, which is an indigenous perennial to the Nosterveld. I think there's a lot of topics surrounding the Nosterveld in the Western Cape. If you look at the endemics, or if you look at the endangerment of the lowland to Nosterveld, not as much is known about mountain to Nosterveld, even though there's more patches of it in the Northern Cape and it's more pristine in Nosterveld. So for me, it would be, or I'm hoping from my master's project, that I can formulate a fire regime for the Nosterveld in Namaqualand, and then from that we can also look at conserving the Nosterveld in the area. I'm also hoping from this to empower the community members to also extinguish fires. They don't have a fire department in the area, so if we can do some fire training with them as well, with kids as well, this would be really great for the area, and it would be really something that they could do as a community. one of the main causes of the fires would be a harvesting of wild honey in the area. So the kids, they use the erythropeppers, they stoke it, and then they burn, or they'll use the, they'll use the fire and then they'll harvest the honey. They don't know how to extinguish the fires properly. So if we can also train them to harvest the honey sustainably, and I think it's a really good thing that they don't go out and buy honey, they actually harvest it from the veld, which is something good, and I think we should continue with that movement. But if we can also just do some training with the kids and tell them there are ways that we can do this, because they have a bit of background knowledge on the bees and the biodiversity in the area. But if I can go and focus mostly on kids, because that's where my passion lies, with empowering children about awareness on the environment, this is something which is usually lacking within our schooling system. So if I can go out and empower them about environmental education, I think this is one step closer to them living a sustainable environment.
Yeah, when they smoke the bees out, do the bees return to that hive?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It depends on how big the fire is.
It's quite serious if they don't.
It is a quite serious issue that they have in the area, and most of the school children have admitted that they are offenders of this, but like I mentioned, they don't know how to extinguish it properly.
Okay, one of the problems that we have is that the bees as pollinators is probably their most important function, and the honey is used to feed their young larvae. It has been suggested that it would be a good idea to actually not harvest honey in order to be able to have the bees rather develop and grow in number to become pollinators for the other food crops. What do you think would happen in your area if you were to say that to people?
I don't think they'll be too happy with that suggestion. But for most parts, they would listen. They would either know this is being a big threat to biodiversity or to the conservation of the bees. I can guarantee you harvesting honey would be something of the past then. They would stop immediately. There will be a few offenders, to put it that way, with kids continuously. Okay.
Are you making a latte?
No.
What are you doing?
You want a latte?
No, I don't want noise. So are you going to make a noise? If you do make it, we'll just wait, make it quick, and then I can finish after that. Sorry.
Just keep the warm milk closer then.
Okay, once this is treated, we'll just carry on. Just wanted to say, I'm going to ask you how much information have you got about the damage that's happening and how the bees are dying out. Do you just give me as much knowledge as you have about bees, what's happening in any part of the world, because not many people know very much. And I'd like to find out what you know. Okay.
About the bees, because my focus is mostly with the Renosterveld.
Can you just, one last vision for the world, what would you say?
I would say living more sustainably as human beings for us. It is to take this country forward, seeing yourself as going green, as I mentioned. It's a cliche, but it's something I want us to really work on. The University of the Western Cape's Cape Flats Nature Reserve got the award for the greenest campus. That is a small initiative, that's something small. If we can in the next 5 years say that the Western Cape is the greenest province in South Africa, and we take that for the next 10 to 15 years, South Africa becomes the greenest country, I can really vision this and see how awesome it would be, and something we can be proud of as a country if we can just educate ourselves, if we can educate our children, if we can tell them about how it is to live sustainably, source everything locally. If there's stuff that you don't need, don't buy it. With soaps, household products, go local, do everything local. We don't need all these commercialized products. I would feel do everything locally, source everything locally, reduce, reuse and recycle. Thank you.
My name is Tobile Kumalo. I'm from the Women's Leadership and Training Program. We work with girls and young women, girls, preteens, teenagers and young women. Preteens are aged from 8 to 12, and teens it's from 11 to 18, and young women from 18 to 35. what we do is we facilitate sessions on climate change and biodiversity and environmental awareness. We are also a women's organization, so we empower women. We have leadership training as well. How we evaluate our work is to see if women take leadership positions in terms of climate change, biodiversity, and environmental awareness. We also have a gardening project where we have about 120 gardeners with their home gardens. The aim of the gardens is also to spread awareness on environmental health and sustainable living. Our gardens are all organic gardens. We don't use any fertilizers or pesticides to maintain them. So everything that we use to maintain the garden is all organic. We also have a citizen science group of girls and boys in terms of biodiversity, because we have a birding club. In that birding club, we also volunteer as citizen scientists to count the number of birds that they are in our place where we live. Yeah.
Where is the place where you live?
We are based in 3 certain different areas. It is Ehlogozi, near High Flats, Guamashu, which is a township, and then Sentokal, near the Drakensberg Mountains.
Are these all in South Africa?
Yes, these are all in South Africa, but in very different places of South Africa. Both are in very deep rural areas, and the other one is in a township. So it is.
Have you been to all 3 areas?
Yes, I have.
Can you describe what they look like for our viewers, please?
Okay. The rural areas, it's deep rural areas. It's houses, rondavels, and a number of houses, and your neighbor is really far away. I don't know what kind of description you're looking for.
Okay. Do you find that women at the moment are understanding that they must start to play a bigger role in society?
With the conscientization that we do, women really start to open up and see that it is their time to take responsibility. After all, we do call this planet the Mother Earth. So as Mother Earth, I think we, the women, should take a lot more responsibility at conserving this Mother of ours, Earth.
If you had to outline your vision for the world, what would you like to say that you would see? If you were really powerful and you could make something wonderful happen, how would you see that wonderful thing in terms of the environment?
We promote reducing the use of fossil fuel byproducts. So we are like no fossil fuel. I'm a living example of that. I would say, adapted to climate change or tried myself as a tool for mitigation. I am all natural. I do not need any hair relaxers, artificial hair. I don't use any products that are bio products of fossil fuel. And then we would like everybody else to do that. And we exercise the 7 R's. We have 7. It's reduce, reuse, recycle, repair, re-educate, restore, and refuse. Yes.
Love, refuse. Can you explain each one of them?
Okay. Reduce whatever consumptions you are using. What is not necessary, do not use that, because it'll impact in whatever. It'll impact on the global climate change cause and effect. Repair. You do not need to go and buy new things. You can always repair what you have to reduce your consumption levels. Re-educate. tell everyone about these things so everyone could be able to practice them, and we could hopefully make an impact on the environment. Reuse. You reuse what you can. Reuse the food that you eat. Instead of throwing away that lemon that you cut in half and you don't want to use it anymore, just use it on yourself. Whatever you eat, you can put on your skin. Restore. Restore broken geysers to save water because it's all linked. Restore taps. Restore your old clothes. Instead of chucking it down, just restore it so you can reduce your consumption level. Because if you have to use more, then production will have to be more. And we all know that in production of everything that you use, there is so much of a carbon footprint that is left by all of those things. What is that? Refuse. Oh, yes, refuse I think is like the most important, because you have to refuse and be disciplined in whatever you do. Take notice of what you do. How does it affect you and in the environment?
If you were to imagine a world that is living in harmony with nature, what would you say? How would it be in one sentence or two?
Oh, a world living in harmony with nature. How would it be?
Yeah.
To describe it?
It's a difficult question.
Yeah, it is. I think it would be a world where people are a lot more enlightened to take notice that we need this environment a lot more than it needs us. We are like a disease, and for us to keep on living on this earth, we need to be aware and to do as much as we can to stop talking about environmental issues, but really get down to the work and make sure that we conserve biodiversity, that we have enough trees, at least a house has a home garden. So, yeah.
Anything you want to say?
I'd like to say that I think when people ask me, so you think you yourself can make a difference? I think, yes, I can. If every one of us play our individual roles into help rehabilitating the environment, we could all make a huge difference. We have home phases. Home phases happen in our area where we come and have meetings at least twice a month. We talk about different issues. We talk about climate change. We talk about biodiversity. And the birding group, we have one outing every week. And we have workshops. We hold workshops. 3 workshops a year. We have workshops in January, in June, and in October. So these are 3-day workshops where there are no distractions. We are just here to talk.
Do you think in the areas that you're dealing with, are you seeing it going down?
Yeah.
Or are you seeing it improving?
With the awareness we've done on water so far in our community, because we don't work normally in the community, we work with girls. So in the community, I see people are much more aware. And if you spread that awareness, people start to take notice of what they are doing. So I think it is improving.
How are people affected at the moment by negative things that are going on in the environment? Have you seen that?
I've seen what my community has to go through, because they had no idea of the impacts.
And when you acknowledge that sort of the resources that are being consumed, wasted through construction, demolition processes, all of this, and you consider energy and climate change and carbon, etc., through the operation of buildings, the responsibility upon the architects has changed in profile. There is no longer that kind of art for art's sake. We actually have a greater responsibility, and whilst the need for art is there, and make no mistake, there's, our cities need to reflect our aspirations, they need to reflect our society, they need to reflect what is good